Hey guys! What if getting high was not invented by the modern world? Tonight we will see what getting high was like in ancient Persia. Before that, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and let me know in the comment where you tuning from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who is joining us from around the world. Thousands of years ago, in ancient Persia, people were already using mysterious plants, sacred drinks, and wine to change the way they experienced the world. One of the strangest was called haumar, a sacred drink whose exact ingredients have been lost to history. Some ancient traditions described it as powerful, sacred, and life-giving. But what did it actually feel like? Did the world begin to look different? Did sounds become strange? Or was the real experience something much quieter? Tonight, we are going to enter that ancient world and spend one long Persian night discovering what getting high may have meant thousands of years ago. The Persian world at night. A quiet evening in ancient Persia. There was a time when the lands of Persia stretched across mountains, deserts, fertile valleys, and broad plains, connecting worlds that today are separated by many borders. Long before modern cities filled the night with electric light, the evening in Persia arrived gradually. The sun would sink behind distant mountains. The heat gathered during the day would slowly leave the stone walls and earthen courtyards. The last brightness would remain along the horizon, turning the sky pale gold, then amber, then a deepening shade of blue. And eventually, the stars would begin to appear. For the people living across the ancient Persian world, night was not simply the absence of daylight. It was another part of life. A different rhythm. A quieter rhythm. The sounds of the day slowly diminished. The movement through markets and streets became less hurried. Animals settled. Fires became more important than sunlight. Lamps and small flames appeared inside homes, courtyards, palaces, workshops, and places of worship. And beyond the settlements, the landscape became enormous. The Persian world contained some of the most varied environments of the ancient Near East. There were dry plateaus where the air could feel incredibly clear after sunset. There were mountain valleys where cold night air descended between dark slopes. There were cultivated plains where irrigation allowed crops to grow despite the surrounding dryness. There were gardens carefully arranged around water channels. There were roads connecting distant settlements, carrying merchants, officials, soldiers, animals, letters, precious goods, spices, textiles, metals, and ideas. And there were cities whose walls and monumental buildings could seem almost unreal beneath the stars. This was the world in which ancient Persian ideas about food, drink, medicine, ritual, pleasure, dreams, and altered states developed. To understand what getting high might have meant in ancient Persia, it helps to begin here. Not with a particular substance. Not with a dramatic ceremony. But with the environment itself. Because ancient people did not divide their experiences into the same categories that modern people do. Today, we tend to separate food from medicine, medicine from religion, religion from entertainment, and entertainment from intoxication. The ancient world was rarely so neatly divided. A plant might be used as medicine in one circumstance, as part of a ritual in another, and as an ingredient in a drink somewhere else. A drink could be nourishing, socially important, pleasurable, ceremonial, or intoxicating, depending on how much was consumed and why. A fragrance might simply make a room pleasant. It might also accompany a religious ceremony. A dream might be understood as an ordinary feature of sleep, a message from the divine, or something requiring interpretation. The boundaries were fluid. And so, when we ask what getting high was like in ancient Persia, we are asking a modern question about an ancient world. The answer cannot simply be a list of substances. It requires stepping backward in time. It requires imagining a society in which the night sky was completely visible. A society without electric illumination. A society where darkness had physical presence. The moon mattered. The seasons mattered. The quality of water mattered. The arrival of rain mattered. The growth of plants mattered. And the changing light of the sky was part of everyday consciousness. In such a world, sensory experiences could become especially important. The smell of crushed herbs. The taste of fermented drink. The warmth of a fire. The coolness of water. The fragrance of flowers. The sweetness of fruit. The bitterness of medicinal plants. The smoke of burning aromatic materials. These sensations belong to ordinary life. But some could also become associated with ceremony and altered awareness. Ancient Persia was not one uniform society. The Persian Empire, particularly under the Achaemenid kings, included an enormous collection of peoples and traditions. Persian rulers governed territories extending from Central Asia and the Iranian plateau toward Mesopotamia, Anatolia, Egypt, and beyond. Different regions had different plants. Different climates produced different crops. Different communities preserved different customs. So there was never one single Persian experience of intoxication. There were many. Some practices were probably ordinary and widespread. Others belonged to particular religious communities. Some may have been associated with wealthy households and royal banquets. Others were connected with medicine. And some are difficult to reconstruct because the evidence has disappeared or survives only indirectly. This uncertainty is important. Ancient Persia left behind monumental architecture, inscriptions, administrative records, religious texts, artistic representations, archaeological remains, and later written traditions. Yet these sources do not provide us with a simple ancient guidebook explaining exactly what every intoxicating substance felt like. There is no surviving Persian equivalent of a modern personal account describing the stages of intoxication in precise psychological language. Instead, historians must piece together fragments. A word here. A ritual description there. A botanical clue. A chemical residue. An archaeological discovery. A later interpretation. A reference in a Greek account. A religious text preserved through centuries of transmission. And sometimes an absence of evidence that reminds us to be cautious. This is especially true when discussing Haumar. Haumar is one of the most fascinating subjects in ancient Iranian religious history. It appears in the Zoroastrian tradition as a sacred substance associated with ritual preparation and offering. The ancient texts describe the pressing and preparation of Haumar, and its importance is unmistakable. But exactly which plant ancient Haumar originally referred to remains a matter of scholarly discussion. Several plants have been proposed over the years. Some theories have suggested psychoactive possibilities. Others have emphasized medicinal or stimulating properties. And some scholars have questioned whether modern expectations about psychoactive experiences have influenced interpretations of the ancient evidence. So we should not imagine certainty where there is none. The mystery is part of the story. Ancient Persian culture also had a long relationship with wine. Viticulture was practiced in various parts of the ancient Iranian world, and wine became an important part of elite and ceremonial life. Greek writers sometimes described Persian banquets and drinking customs. Their accounts need to be read carefully because Greek observers were outsiders, and ancient writers often shaped foreign cultures according to their own assumptions. Still, the evidence contributes to a broader picture. Wine was known. Wine was consumed. And in some contexts, drinking was connected with hospitality, celebration, status, and social life. Imagine, then, an evening in an ancient Persian settlement. The exact location does not matter. Perhaps somewhere on the Iranian plateau. Perhaps near a cultivated valley. Perhaps within a larger imperial city. The sun has disappeared. The stones are cooling. A small flame moves gently in the darkness. The air carries traces of earth, smoke, food, and vegetation. There is no traffic. No electrical hum. No distant glow from a modern city. Only darkness beyond the walls. Above everything is the night sky. And somewhere within this world, people are eating bread, fruit, grains, meat in households where it is available, vegetables, dairy products, perhaps wine, perhaps other fermented drinks, perhaps herbal preparations. Food and drink are not merely fuel. They are part of hospitality, part of celebration, part of medicine, part of ritual, part of the ancient understanding of comfort. The concept of intoxication itself would have been familiar. People knew that certain drinks could change the way the body felt. They knew that excessive drinking could produce confusion, sleepiness, dizziness, or loss of control. They did not need modern chemistry to recognize these effects. Human beings have always been observers of their own bodies. Someone drinks. The body warms. The face changes. The voice becomes louder. Balance becomes less certain. Thoughts become less orderly. Sleep may arrive. The ancient world understood these transformations through observation rather than molecular explanation. And this difference is important. A modern person might say, this substance affects the nervous system. An ancient Persian might instead describe a drink according to its warmth, bitterness, strength, sacred significance, medicinal value, or effect on the body and mind. The vocabulary was different. The experience itself was not necessarily incomprehensible. The human body has changed very little. The feeling of warmth after alcohol. The heaviness that follows excessive drinking. The unusual vividness of dreams. The calm that may come from certain fragrances. The bitterness of medicine. The stimulation of strong flavors. These physical experiences belong to humanity across thousands of years. But ancient Persian culture gave these experiences its own meanings. Purity was important in Zoroastrian religious thought. The relationship between the physical and spiritual worlds mattered. Fire had profound symbolic importance. Water was precious. What did getting high mean in ancient Persia? As the night settled more completely over the ancient Persian world, the distinction between the ordinary and the extraordinary became softer. During daylight, everything had its practical purpose. Water was carried. Fields were cultivated. Animals were tended. Bread was prepared. Goods were exchanged. Buildings were constructed. Letters were written. Taxes were collected. Roads were traveled. The great machinery of an ancient empire continued moving from one sunrise to another. But night brought another atmosphere. The same landscape could appear entirely different beneath the stars. The mountains became dark shapes. Gardens became quiet spaces filled with shadow. Courtyards were illuminated only by small flames. The sounds of work gradually disappeared. And in that quieter environment, the ancient mind had more room for dreams, stories, rituals, memories, and questions about the unseen. It is here that we can begin to understand what an altered state might have meant in ancient Persia. The modern phrase getting high is convenient, but it can also be misleading. It suggests a particular modern idea. A person consumes a substance specifically to experience a noticeable change in consciousness. Sometimes the purpose is recreation. Sometimes escape. Sometimes experimentation. Sometimes social enjoyment. But ancient people did not necessarily separate these purposes so clearly. A substance could have several meanings at once. Wine could be enjoyed. Wine could be offered to guests. Wine could accompany a feast. Wine could be associated with wealth and status. And wine could obviously produce intoxication. A medicinal plant could relieve pain. Another plant could help with digestion. An aromatic preparation could calm the senses. A ritual substance could be regarded as sacred. The same natural world supplied all of these possibilities. There was no modern pharmaceutical industry dividing every substance into carefully labeled categories. Instead, knowledge was often accumulated through experience. Generation after generation observed plants. Some were nourishing. Some were poisonous. Some were useful. Some were unpleasant. Some were soothing. Some were stimulating. Some had effects that were difficult to explain. And people remembered. The knowledge of plants was therefore not merely botanical. It was cultural memory. A particular plant might be associated with a particular region. A particular drink might be associated with celebration. A particular preparation might be associated with priests or healers. A particular fragrance might remind people of temples. A particular herb might be known for its bitterness and medicinal value. And through centuries of observation, these associations became traditions. Ancient Persian culture developed within a larger Iranian world that possessed an extensive knowledge of plants and their uses. The Iranian plateau itself contained remarkable botanical diversity. Mountain regions, river valleys, deserts, grasslands, and cultivated areas all provided different resources. Plants could be gathered from the wild. Others could be cultivated. Some could be dried and stored. Some could be crushed. Some could be boiled. Some could be pressed. Some could be mixed with water. Others could be incorporated into food or drink. The method of preparation mattered. The amount mattered. The timing mattered. And the condition of the body mattered. Even today, the same substance can produce different effects depending on concentration, quantity, food intake, fatigue, expectation, and individual physiology. Ancient people may not have described these variables in scientific language, but they certainly observed differences. Someone who drank a small amount of wine did not experience exactly what happened after drinking a great deal. Someone who consumed a medicinal preparation in a carefully measured quantity did not necessarily experience the same effects from excessive use. The idea that more automatically means better would have been dangerous in any ancient society. Plants could heal. Plants could also harm. And some substances existed very close to that boundary. This is particularly important when considering the ancient Iranian tradition of Haumar. Haumar occupies a fascinating position in the history of religion. The word appears in ancient Iranian religious texts, and related traditions survived into later Zoroastrian practice. The ritual involved the preparation and pressing of the substance, which was then associated with offerings and religious ceremony. There is something almost tangible about the description. Plant material. Liquid. Pressure. Water. Ritual words. Careful preparation. A substance transformed from something growing in the natural world into something used within a sacred setting. But the identity of the original plant remains uncertain. This is one of the great puzzles. The ancient texts describe Haumar in ways that tell us about its ritual importance, but they do not provide modern botanical classification. The plant known as hamar in later traditions may not be identical to the plant used thousands of years earlier. The environment also changed. Plants grow differently in different regions. Religious traditions evolve. Names can shift. Knowledge can be forgotten. And ritual practices can survive even after the original material has become difficult to identify. For this reason, claims that ancient Persian hamar was definitely a powerful hallucinogen should be treated cautiously. There are theories. There are candidates. There are arguments. But certainty is limited. And perhaps that uncertainty makes hamar more interesting, not less. Because the mystery reveals something about ancient knowledge. People did not always need to understand the chemical mechanism of a substance to give it meaning. A plant could be sacred because tradition declared it sacred. A drink could be important because it was connected with ritual. A preparation could be respected because generations had used it. Its meaning did not depend entirely upon its chemistry. The ancient Persian world was also deeply influenced by Zoroastrian religious ideas. The religion associated with Zarathustra, or Zoroaster, placed considerable emphasis on truth, moral choice, purity, and the cosmic struggle between forces associated with order and destruction. The physical world mattered. Human actions mattered. Thoughts mattered. Words mattered. And ritual practices helped express relationships between human beings and the sacred order. Within this framework, altered consciousness could not simply be understood as entertainment. A religious experience had a different meaning. A dream could be interpreted. A vision could be meaningful. A ritual could place the individual within a larger sacred structure. And substances used during religious ceremonies could therefore possess significance beyond their physical effects. This is something that appears repeatedly throughout human history. People have used fasting, music, rhythm, dance, prayer, darkness, light, breath control, solitude, sleep deprivation, incense, alcohol, plants, and many other methods to change ordinary states of awareness. The desire to experience consciousness differently is not a modern invention. But the interpretation of that experience changes from culture to culture. For one society, a vision might be understood as communication with the divine. For another, it might be interpreted as a dream. For another, as illness. For another, as the effect of a plant. And sometimes, several explanations could exist simultaneously. Ancient Persian culture was part of a much larger world of exchange. Persian territories connected different peoples. Merchants traveled. Armies moved. Languages encountered one another. Ideas traveled along roads. Plants and spices traveled with them. Medicinal knowledge could move between cultures. So it would be misleading to imagine ancient Persia as completely isolated. The Persian Empire stood at the crossroads of regions with long traditions of medicine, ritual, agriculture, and intoxicating beverages. Mesopotamia had ancient knowledge of plants and medicines. Egypt possessed sophisticated traditions of healing and ritual. The peoples of Central Asia cultivated and gathered different plants. The Greek world had its own traditions of wine, medicine, and altered consciousness. India possessed extensive knowledge of plants, ritual drinks, and states of consciousness. These traditions did not remain perfectly separate. The ancient world was interconnected. Yet Persia maintained its own cultural and religious framework. That framework shaped the way substances were understood. Consider wine again. Wine was not simply a chemical mixture containing ethanol. It was also an agricultural product. It began with grapes. Grapes depended upon land, water, sunlight, labor, seasons, and knowledge. Fermentation transformed their juice. Storage preserved the result. Containers protected it. And eventually the drink became part of social life. Wine could appear at banquets. It could be associated with hospitality. It could accompany food. It could symbolize abundance. And, naturally, it could change consciousness. The physical effects of alcohol are familiar. A small quantity can create warmth and relaxation. A larger amount can impair coordination. Speech can become less precise. Judgment can become weaker. Wine and the Persian table. The night over ancient Persia has grown deeper now. The last traces of evening have disappeared from the sky, and the landscape rests beneath a darkness that would have been almost unimaginable to the modern world. There are no electric lamps glowing across distant hills. No illuminated roads stretching toward the horizon. No towers of glass reflecting the moon. Instead, there are small islands of light. A lamp inside a house. A fire in a courtyard. A few flames illuminating a place where food is being prepared. Beyond these small circles of warmth, the darkness remains almost complete. And somewhere within this ancient night, another part of Persian life begins to come into view. Wine. The history of wine in the Persian world is old, complicated, and deeply connected with agriculture, hospitality, wealth, trade, and social customs. When we think about ancient Persia, it is easy to imagine magnificent palaces, golden objects, royal processions, monumental staircases, and enormous imperial banquets. But before wine could appear in a royal cup, something much quieter had to happen. Grapes had to grow. Vines needed suitable land. The soil had to be capable of supporting them. Water had to be available, whether from rainfall, streams, springs, or irrigation. And someone had to understand the rhythms of cultivation. The vine was not simply a decorative plant. It was part of an agricultural system. The ancient Iranian world contained regions suitable for vineyards, particularly in areas where climate, elevation, and water created favorable conditions. The Persian plateau was not one uniform landscape. Some places were intensely dry. Others were fertile. Some valleys were protected by mountains. Some regions experienced cold winters. Others enjoyed warmer conditions. This diversity allowed different agricultural traditions to develop. And wherever grapes were cultivated, there was the possibility of fermentation. Fermentation is a simple natural process, but for ancient people it must have seemed almost magical. Fresh grape juice does not remain unchanged forever. Under the right conditions, naturally occurring yeasts transform sugars into alcohol. The sweet liquid changes. Its aroma changes. Its taste changes. Its effects on the body change. And without understanding microorganisms or biochemistry, ancient farmers and winemakers learned how to work with the process. They learned through observation. They learned which grapes were suitable. They learned how to collect and press them. They learned about storage. They learned that containers mattered. They learned that temperature mattered. They learned that some batches were better than others. And over generations, this practical knowledge became tradition. Wine therefore began long before the moment it was poured into a cup. It began in the vineyard. It began with sunlight, with water, with soil, with seasons, with labor, with patience. The grape itself was a product of time. And wine was another transformation of that product. This idea of transformation appears repeatedly throughout ancient life. Grain becomes bread. Milk becomes cheese. Fruit becomes a preserved food. Plants become medicine. Grapes become wine. The ancient world depended upon transformation because preservation was difficult. There were no refrigerators. There were no modern sterilization systems. There were no industrial bottling plants. Food had to be preserved through drying, salting, fermentation, smoking, cooling, or other methods. Fermentation was therefore not merely about pleasure. It was also part of ancient food technology. Wine could be stored. It could be transported. It could become an important commodity. And because it could be preserved more easily than fresh grape juice, it had practical value. Yet wine possessed another quality. It changed consciousness. This would have been impossible to ignore. Anyone who drank enough wine would notice that the body behaved differently. The face might become warmer. The senses might feel altered. Conversation might become easier. Tiredness might temporarily feel distant. Emotions might become stronger. Movement might become less precise. And with greater consumption, judgment could become impaired. The ancient Persians did not need modern chemistry to understand this. They could observe it. They could remember it. They could talk about it. They could develop customs around it. And they could learn that the amount consumed mattered. This is an important part of understanding wine in ancient Persia. The existence of wine did not mean that everyone was constantly drunk. Ancient societies were more complicated than that. Wine could be consumed in small quantities. It could be diluted. It could accompany food. It could be offered to guests. It could appear at celebrations. And it could be consumed excessively. These were different experiences. The Persian world also contained strong traditions of hospitality. Hospitality was not simply a pleasant social habit. In an ancient environment where travelers depended heavily upon the generosity of others, hospitality could have practical importance. A visitor arriving at a household might need water. Food might be offered. A place to rest might be provided. And in elite environments, elaborate hospitality could become a display of wealth and status. The ability to provide abundant food and drink demonstrated resources. A large household could feed guests. A wealthy estate could produce or acquire wine. A royal court could gather products from many parts of a vast empire. The table therefore became a place where wealth could be displayed. And wine belonged naturally within that world. The Achaemenid Persian Empire, particularly at its height, connected enormous territories. Goods traveled over long distances. Administrative systems moved information. Royal estates produced agricultural products. Tributes arrived from subject regions. Merchants carried valuable commodities between cities. Within such a network, wine could move as well. Different regions were known for different agricultural products. The empire brought together communities with their own food traditions and drinking customs. Persian elites therefore lived within an environment where many kinds of food and drink could be encountered. This helps explain why the royal banquet became such an important image in accounts of Persia. Ancient Greek writers described Persian feasting in several contexts. Their descriptions are valuable, but they must be treated carefully. Greek writers were not neutral observers. They had their own cultural ideas about luxury, moderation, foreignness, and the Persian court. Sometimes descriptions of Persian luxury may have reflected Greek moral storytelling as much as direct observation. Still, when multiple sources point toward the importance of feasting and drinking at elite levels, the general picture becomes difficult to ignore. The Persian court possessed resources on an enormous scale. Food could be abundant. Wine could be available. Ceremonial meals could involve hierarchy and presentation. And the act of drinking could become part of a broader performance of status. Imagine, not a specific historical individual, but the atmosphere of such an evening. A large hall or courtyard. Low light. Stone architecture cooling after the heat of the day. Food arranged for guests. Metal vessels reflecting firelight. Ceramic containers holding liquids. The smell of cooked food mixing with smoke, herbs, fruit, and wine. Conversation moving through the gathering. Music perhaps accompanying the meal in some settings. Servants moving quietly through the space. The night outside. The empire beyond the walls. And within this atmosphere, wine is more than a drink. It becomes part of the environment. It can relax the body. It can encourage conversation. It can make a meal feel more festive. And, if consumed in greater quantities, it can begin to alter awareness. This is where the ancient idea of intoxication becomes especially interesting. Modern descriptions often focus on the internal experience. The sensation of being high. The change in perception. The feeling of lightness or heaviness. The slowing or speeding of thoughts. The alteration of mood. But in ancient societies, the social environment was often just as important as the substance. A drink taken alone is different from the same drink consumed during a feast. A small quantity is different from a large one. Drinking while tired is different from drinking after a meal. Drinking in a religious context is different from drinking during celebration. The substance does not exist separately from the setting. And this was true in ancient Persia. The meaning of wine depended upon where it was consumed, who consumed it, why it was consumed, and how much was taken. The same cup could represent hospitality in one setting and excess in another. This is one reason why ancient Persian drinking culture cannot be reduced to the simple statement that Persians liked wine. That would be too simple. Wine existed within a complex network of agricultural, economic, social, and cultural relationships. And there was another important element. Wine was not necessarily available to everyone in equal quantities. Social status mattered. Geography mattered. Wealth mattered. Access to vineyards mattered. The ability to store and transport wine mattered. Ordinary rural households might have had very different experiences from elite Persian courts. For many people, everyday drinks may have included water, fermented beverages, or other locally available preparations. The availability of wine would have depended upon region and resources. The feeling of wine at a Persian feast. The vineyard has disappeared into the darkness now. The rows of vines are barely visible beneath the night sky, and the distant mountains have become quiet shadows along the horizon. But the wine remains. Somewhere inside a clay vessel, the harvest of an earlier season rests in darkness. The grapes have already been transformed. Their sweetness has become something deeper, sharper, and capable of changing the way the body feels. Eventually, that wine would find its way to the Persian table. In ancient Persia, a meal could be much more than a way of satisfying hunger. Food could express hospitality. Abundance could display wealth. A carefully prepared table could communicate generosity and social position. And wine could become part of that atmosphere. Imagine an ancient evening after the heat of the day has finally disappeared. The stone walls have cooled. The air is gentle. Small lamps provide pools of warm light. Food has been prepared, and vessels have been arranged. There is no electric light extending the day far into the night. There are no clocks demanding attention every few minutes. The evening can simply unfold. Food is eaten slowly. Conversation continues. And wine may be poured. The first sensation would probably be subtle. A little wine does not instantly create a dramatic change. There is first the taste, the aroma, and the warmth of the drink. The body absorbs the alcohol gradually. The mind may begin to feel more relaxed. Conversation can seem easier. Small worries may feel less important. The evening may appear softer. This is the beginning of intoxication. It is a process rather than a single moment. As more alcohol enters the body, the changes become clearer. Warmth can spread through the body. Judgment can become less careful. Emotions can become stronger. Movement can become slightly less precise. Speech may become more energetic. And eventually, if drinking continues, relaxation can become heaviness. Ancient Persians would have understood these effects through observation. They did not need modern chemistry to recognize that wine could change the body and mind. They knew that the amount consumed mattered. A small quantity and a large quantity were very different experiences. The setting mattered too. Wine consumed during a peaceful meal was different from wine consumed during an enormous celebration. The Persian royal court provides one of the most fascinating settings. The Achaemenid Empire connected enormous territories, bringing together people, goods, foods, and customs from many regions. At the royal level, feasting could display this extraordinary wealth. Food from different lands could appear. Fine vessels could be used. Wine could be served. The entire meal could become a demonstration of imperial abundance. Yet beneath all this grandeur remained something very simple. The human body. The cup might be beautifully crafted. The palace might be magnificent. The meal might represent the wealth of an enormous empire. But once wine entered the body, the physical response was still the same. Warmth. Relaxation. Changing judgment. Increasing intoxication. Eventually, tiredness. This contrast between imperial power and ordinary human physiology is one of the fascinating things about ancient drinking culture. The Persian Empire could control vast territories, yet its rulers were still affected by hunger, thirst, fatigue, and alcohol just like everyone else. Wine also belonged to the world of hospitality. Offering food and drink to guests could demonstrate generosity and respect. A drink was not simply liquid. It could be a gesture of welcome. At wealthy households and royal gatherings, the presentation of wine could also communicate status. The vessel, the quality of the drink, the people being served, and the setting could all carry meaning. But drinking was not necessarily about becoming completely intoxicated. Ancient societies understood excess. Too much wine could lead to poor judgment, loss of balance, sickness, arguments, and unpleasant mornings. Self-control was therefore important. The ideal was often not complete abstinence, but the ability to enjoy pleasure without losing dignity. This idea appears in many ancient cultures, including the Persian world. Greek writers sometimes described Persian drinking customs, although their accounts must be treated carefully. Greek authors were outsiders, and their descriptions of Persia could reflect their own ideas about luxury and foreignness. Nevertheless, archaeology and written evidence confirm that wine was known and used in the ancient Iranian world. The exact experience varied. Ancient wine was not identical to modern bottled wine. Strength, flavor, preparation, storage, and ingredients could differ. Some drinks may have been mixed or flavored. Containers also varied, from simple pottery vessels to elaborate objects used by wealthy households. The entire experience was therefore shaped by the world around the drink. Imagine wine being consumed near a garden. The air is cool. Water moves quietly through a channel. Flowers and trees surround the space. A small fire flickers nearby. The fragrance of plants mixes with food and smoke. The wine adds another sensation. Taste. Warmth. Relaxation. The environment matters. a substance never exists completely apart from its surroundings. Sound, smell, temperature, food, expectation, and company all influence how an experience feels. This was true in ancient Persia just as it is today. Eventually, the evening begins to slow. The meal becomes quieter. The lamps burn lower. The wine vessels become lighter. Conversation fades. The body becomes tired. For someone who had drunk moderately, the final sensation might simply have been warmth and relaxation before sleep. But the ancient world also knew the unpleasant side of excessive drinking. Too much wine could produce nausea, confusion, headaches, and loss of control. The morning could bring consequences. So ancient Persian drinking should not be imagined as endless celebration. For most people, most evenings were probably much more ordinary. A meal, a drink, a fire, rest, sleep. Wine was one part of life, not the whole of it. And this is what makes it interesting. It could be agricultural. It could be social. It could be ceremonial. It could be pleasurable. It could be intoxicating. And it could be dangerous when taken too far. The night over Persia continues. The banquet has ended. The vessels have been placed aside. The fire has become smaller. Outside, the garden is silent. Water moves gently through the darkness. Above it all, the stars remain bright. Thousands of years have passed, but the basic human experience remains familiar. The desire to share food. The comfort of a drink. The warmth of conversation. The feeling of becoming tired after a long evening. And finally, the quiet that comes when everyone rests. Wine was only the beginning. Beyond the vineyards and banquet tables was another, far more mysterious part of ancient Iranian culture. A sacred substance known as haumar. Its identity remains uncertain. Its ancient preparation was connected with ritual. And its meaning went far beyond the simple idea of intoxication. The journey will soon leave the comfortable world of vineyards and enter the more mysterious landscape of sacred plants, religious ceremony, and altered consciousness. But for now, the Persian table is quiet. The cups are empty. The fire is fading. The garden rests beneath the moon. And the ancient night continues without hurry. Slowly. Quietly. Peacefully. The mystery of haumar. The sacred plant of ancient Iran. The Persian night continues quietly. Beyond the vineyards and the banquet halls, beyond the gardens and the softly illuminated courtyards, the ancient Iranian landscape stretches toward mountains, dry plains, valleys, and distant horizons. Here, another part of the story begins. Not with wine. Not with feasting. But with a plant. A mysterious plant known in the ancient Iranian religious tradition as haumar. Few subjects are more intriguing when exploring altered states in ancient Persia. Haumar was important enough to become part of sacred ritual. It was prepared carefully. It was pressed. It was associated with prayer and religious ceremony. It was praised in ancient Iranian religious poetry. And yet, after thousands of years, one fundamental question remains difficult to answer. What exactly was the original haumar plant? The uncertainty begins with the ancient world itself. Modern people are accustomed to identifying plants through scientific names. A plant can be classified by its species, family, physical structure, chemical compounds, and genetic characteristics. Ancient people did not have this system. Plants were known through appearance, location, use, taste, smell, season, and tradition. A name could describe a group of plants. A traditional name could continue even when the original plant became difficult to find. and religious practices could survive long after their original environment had changed. This makes Haumar particularly difficult to identify. The word belongs to the ancient Iranian religious vocabulary. A closely related term, soma, appears in the ancient Indian religious tradition. The similarity between the two traditions is significant because ancient Iranian and Indo-Aryan cultures shared very old linguistic and cultural connections. Both traditions preserved memories of a sacred plant or sacred preparation. Both connected it with ritual. Both gave it extraordinary importance. And both traditions transformed the ancient idea in their own ways. The Iranian Haumar tradition became part of Zoroastrian religious practice. The earliest surviving Zoroastrian texts contain hymns dedicated to Haumar. These passages reveal something remarkable. Haumar was not merely a plant sitting quietly in the landscape. It had become part of the religious imagination. It was associated with vitality, strength, health, ritual purity, and spiritual significance. The plant was gathered. It was prepared. It was pressed. Its juice became part of ceremony. The process itself mattered. There was something sacred about transforming a plant into a liquid preparation through deliberate ritual action. The ancient Iranian religious world placed great importance on ritual order. Words mattered. Actions mattered. Purity mattered. The correct performance of religious practices mattered. Haumar belonged within that structured environment. This means that asking whether Haumar got people high may already be asking the wrong question. The ancient people who used it may not have thought primarily in terms of recreational intoxication. The purpose was religious. The experience was interpreted through a sacred worldview. If the preparation affected the body or mind, that effect would have been understood within the meaning of the ritual. This distinction is important. A modern person might consume a substance specifically to produce a psychological effect. An ancient worshipper could participate in a ritual because the substance was sacred. The physical sensation might have been important, but it was not necessarily the central purpose. Haumar was also connected with vitality. In the ancient texts, it is associated with strength, health, and life. It was not simply a substance of escape. Its symbolism was closer to renewal. The plant came from nature. It was transformed through ritual. It was then incorporated into a religious act. Nature became ceremony. And ceremony connected the human body with the sacred order. This relationship between plants and religion is extremely old. Across many ancient cultures, plants were considered special because they possessed properties that humans could not fully explain. Some plants healed. Some relieved pain. Some stimulated the body. Some caused sleep. Some caused sickness. Some changed perception. And some could kill. Without modern chemistry, these effects could seem mysterious. The natural world therefore contained both medicine and danger. Ancient Iranian religious traditions developed within this world of botanical knowledge. The people who gathered plants had to know where they grew. They had to recognize them. They had to understand which parts could be used. They had to know when to gather them. And they had to distinguish useful plants from dangerous ones. This was practical knowledge accumulated over generations. Haumar's sacred status may have developed partly within this broader relationship between humans and useful plants. But the identity of the plant remains uncertain. Different scholars have proposed different candidates. Some have suggested plants with stimulating or psychoactive properties. Others have proposed species that may have been used for medicinal reasons. Some theories have focused on plants found in mountainous regions of Central Asia and Iran. Other interpretations emphasize the possibility that the original plant may have changed through time or that the word Haumar could have referred to different related plants. There is no universally accepted answer. And that uncertainty is important enough to keep repeating. Ancient history often contains mysteries that cannot be solved simply by imagination. When evidence is incomplete, it is tempting to fill the gaps with exciting explanations. Hammer has sometimes been presented as a secret ancient psychedelic. That possibility has attracted considerable attention. But the evidence does not allow such a simple conclusion. The ancient texts clearly establish its ritual importance. They clearly establish that it was prepared and consumed or offered in ritual contexts. But they do not provide a modern description of a psychedelic experience. There is no ancient instruction saying that hammer was consumed specifically to produce vivid hallucinations. There is no surviving chemical analysis of the original plant. And the exact botanical identity remains debated. So the mystery should remain a mystery. Perhaps hammer contained substances that affected consciousness. Perhaps its effects were primarily stimulating or medicinal. Perhaps different plants were identified with the same religious name at different times. Perhaps its importance was largely symbolic and ritual. There may never be one completely certain answer. But this uncertainty does not make hammer unimportant. In fact, it makes the subject more revealing. It shows us how ancient people understood nature. A plant could become sacred. Its preparation could become ritualized. Its use could become connected with prayers and religious ideas. The physical world could become part of spiritual life. This relationship is central to ancient Iranian religion. The natural world was not merely a collection of resources. It was part of a larger cosmic order. Fire had meaning. Water had meaning. Animals had meaning. Plants had meaning. Purity had meaning. Human choices had meaning. The world was understood through relationships between visible and invisible forces. Hammer therefore belonged to a much larger system of thought. Its juice was not simply something to drink. It represented transformation. A living plant was gathered from the natural world. It was separated from its environment. It was prepared by human hands. Its juice was extracted. That juice became part of a ritual. The ordinary became sacred. This transformation may have been one of the reasons the substance held such importance. There is also something peaceful about imagining the process itself. The mountains of ancient Iran beneath morning light. Plants growing among stones. Cold air moving through high valleys. The scent of earth. The quiet sound of water. Hands carefully gathering vegetation. The plant carried back from the landscape. The ritual preparation performed slowly and deliberately. There is no need to imagine a dramatic scene. Ancient religious rituals could be repetitive. They could involve careful movements. They could follow established patterns. The same words could be spoken again and again. The same actions could be repeated across generations. This repetition created continuity. A ritual performed today connected the living with those who had performed it before. Hammer therefore existed not only as a physical substance but also as a memory. Its meaning had been carried through generations. And this helps explain why the tradition survived even though the identity of the original plant became uncertain. The ritual could preserve the name. The religious texts could preserve the hymns. The practice could preserve the preparation. But the botanical world itself could change. Plants disappear from regions. Climate changes. Trade routes shift. Religious communities migrate. Languages evolve. Names acquire new meanings. And eventually, something that was once obvious can become mysterious. This may be what happened with Haumar. By the time later Zoroastrian communities continued the ritual, the plant they used may not have been identical to the earliest form. that does not necessarily mean the later tradition was meaningless. For religious communities, continuity can matter more than botanical precision. The ritual itself becomes the connection to the past. And so Haumar remained. A sacred preparation. A religious symbol. A mysterious plant. The ritual and the sacred drink. The ancient Iranian night remains quiet. The mountains are hidden beneath darkness, and the valleys rest beneath a sky filled with stars. Somewhere in this vast landscape, plants grow quietly in places where people have learned to find them. Among them is the mysterious Haumar. We have already seen that its exact identity remains uncertain. But its ritual importance is much clearer. Haumar was not simply gathered, placed into a container, and consumed casually. Its preparation belonged to a religious world in which careful actions had meaning. The plant was pressed. Its juice was collected. Water could be involved in the preparation. Prayers and sacred words accompanied the ritual. The process transformed an ordinary plant into something belonging to religious ceremony. This transformation is perhaps the most important part of understanding Haumar. The ancient Iranian world did not separate nature and religion as sharply as modern life often does. Plants came from the earth. Water came from rivers, springs, and rain. Fire came from burning wood. Animals provided food and materials. All of these belong to the natural world, yet they could also become part of sacred practice. Haumar followed the same pattern. The plant existed in nature, but through ritual it became something more. The pressing of Haumar was not simply a method of extracting liquid. It was an act surrounded by tradition. The preparation had to be performed correctly. The words had to be remembered. The sequence mattered. The sacred substance had to be treated with respect. In this way, ritual created a bridge between the physical and spiritual worlds. The juice itself may have looked simple. A liquid prepared from plant material. Perhaps pale, perhaps colored by the plant and the method of preparation. But its meaning was enormous. For those who participated in the ritual, Haumar could represent vitality, strength, healing, and sacred power. The ancient hymns associated with Haumar contain imagery of vigor and renewal. This is different from the modern idea of taking a substance simply to escape reality. Haumar belonged to a religious system. Its purpose was connected with the sacred order. And this is why it is difficult to translate its experience into modern language. If the drink produced physical or psychological effects, those effects would have been interpreted through religious belief. A feeling of energy might be understood as sacred vitality. A change in awareness might be interpreted as part of ritual experience. A sense of strength might reinforce the belief in Haumar's power. Expectation itself could also influence experience. When a person approaches a ritual believing that a sacred substance possesses special power, the entire experience can become more intense. The surroundings matter. The prayers matter. The smell of plants matters. The repetition of sacred words matters. The anticipation matters. The meaning given to the substance matters. All of these things shape human perception. This does not tell us exactly what Haumar did chemically, but it helps explain why the ritual could have been powerful even without a dramatic intoxicating effect. The preparation itself created an atmosphere. There was movement, sound, texture, taste, scent, prayer, tradition, and concentration. The ritual gathered the senses into one experience. The ancient Iranian religious tradition also placed great importance on purity. This idea influenced many aspects of religious practice. Clean water was important. Fire was important. Certain forms of contamination were treated seriously. Ritual actions were performed with care. The sacred world required order. Hamar therefore belonged within an environment where preparation was not casual. The act of pressing the plant was itself meaningful. There is something almost meditative about repetitive ritual. The same movements are performed again and again. The same words are remembered. The same sequence is followed. The individual becomes part of something much older than themselves. This repetition creates a sense of continuity. A ritual performed today connects with rituals performed by previous generations. The substance becomes a physical link between past and present. Hamar was therefore more than a mysterious drink. It was also a memory. A tradition preserved through time. A reminder that ancient Iranian religious culture had developed long before the Persian Empire reached its greatest extent. The tradition belonged to an older Iranian world, and its roots reach back into the shared cultural background of ancient Indo-Iranian peoples. This is where the comparison with the ancient Indian Soma tradition becomes especially interesting. The names are linguistically related. Both are associated with sacred ritual. Both involve a plant or plant preparation. Both were considered powerful. And both became central to religious traditions that preserved memories of a much older culture. Yet the traditions developed separately. The exact original plant remains uncertain in both cases. This does not mean that ancient people were confused. It means that their knowledge was preserved differently from modern scientific knowledge. A modern botanical identity depends upon classification. Ancient religious identity depended upon tradition. A plant could be known because people knew how to recognize it, where it grew, and what it meant. That knowledge could be passed from one generation to another without anyone knowing its scientific species name. If the plant later became rare, disappeared from a particular region, or was replaced by another plant with similar characteristics, the name and ritual could survive. This possibility makes the history of Hamar especially complicated. Modern researchers have proposed several candidates. Some have focused on plants with stimulating or psychoactive properties. Others have proposed species with medicinal characteristics. Some have considered plants associated with mountainous regions. But none of these theories has achieved complete certainty. The evidence is simply not strong enough. And so we should resist the temptation to describe Hamar as definitely psychedelic. That claim goes beyond what the surviving evidence can prove. It is possible that some forms of Hamar had noticeable effects on consciousness. It is also possible that the effects were less dramatic. Perhaps the preparation produced stimulation. Perhaps it had medicinal effects. Perhaps its primary importance was ritual. Perhaps different varieties were used in different periods. There may have been more than one answer across thousands of years. This uncertainty is not a weakness in the story. It is part of the story. Ancient history is full of incomplete memories. Ruins remain without their original sounds. Objects survive without the people who used them. Words survive after their meanings have changed. And rituals survive after their original plants have disappeared. Hamar belongs to this world of incomplete memory. The name survives. The ritual survives. The sacred poetry survives. But the original experience remains partly hidden. Perhaps that is why the subject continues to fascinate. We can almost see the ritual. The plant. The pressing. The liquid. The prayers. The careful preparation. Yet when we ask exactly how the drink felt, the evidence becomes silent. The silence invites imagination, but history asks us to remain careful. So tonight, we can simply allow the ancient ritual to remain mysterious. Imagine the landscape rather than inventing a person. Imagine the mountains rising beyond the settlement. Imagine the cool air before sunrise. Imagine vegetation gathered from the land. Imagine the careful preparation of a sacred drink. Imagine words spoken in an ancient language whose original sounds have long since disappeared. And then imagine the quiet moment after the ritual. The vessel resting. The fire burning softly. The surrounding landscape still. Whatever physical effect Hammar possessed, its deeper importance was already present. It had become part of a relationship between humanity and the sacred world. A plant from the earth had been transformed into a symbol of life, strength, and ritual renewal. And perhaps this is the most peaceful way to understand Hammar. Not as a forgotten ancient drug waiting to be rediscovered, but as a window into the ancient Iranian imagination. A world where plants could be sacred, where rituals could transform ordinary materials, where the natural world could carry spiritual meaning, and where the human mind could search for connection with something beyond itself. The night continues. The mountains remain silent. The stars move slowly overhead. The sacred plant remains a mystery. And somewhere in the distant past, a ritual once ended beneath a sky not so different from the one above us now. The fire became smaller. The voices faded. The sacred vessel was set aside. And the ancient Iranian landscape returned to silence. Slowly. Peacefully. Quietly. The mystery of Hammar remains. Plants, medicine, and altered states. The ancient Persian apothecary. The mystery of Hammar now fades gently into the background. The mountains remain beneath the stars, but our journey moves toward another part of ancient Persian life. Medicine. Long before pharmacies, laboratories, chemical formulas, and modern hospitals, people depended upon the natural world for healing. The ancient Persian landscape provided an enormous collection of materials. Roots, leaves, seeds, flowers, resins, oils, fruits, minerals, and countless plants whose properties had been discovered slowly through generations of experience. Some were useful. Some were harmless. Some were powerful. And some could be dangerous. The ancient knowledge of medicine was therefore also knowledge of risk. A plant that helped one condition might cause another problem if consumed incorrectly. A preparation that soothed pain could become harmful in excessive quantities. A substance that encouraged sleep could become dangerous if used improperly. The difference between medicine and poison was often a matter of quantity, preparation, and circumstance. This was true thousands of years ago, just as it remains true in principle today. Ancient Persian medicine developed within a much larger Near Eastern and Iranian tradition. Persian territories connected different cultures, and knowledge could travel with merchants, physicians, travelers, soldiers, and scholars. Ideas from Mesopotamia, Egypt, Greece, Central Asia, and India could encounter Iranian traditions over long periods of time. The result was not one simple medical system. It was a constantly developing body of knowledge. Some remedies were based on observation. Others were connected with religious beliefs. Some treatments probably worked because their ingredients contained genuinely useful compounds. Others may have had little physical effect. And some could have been harmful. Ancient healers did not possess the modern tools required to separate these categories reliably. Yet they were not simply guessing. They observed. They remembered. They experimented. They passed information forward. A healer might know that a particular herb could calm the stomach. Another might know that a particular preparation could reduce pain. Another might understand that a certain plant was useful for wounds. Knowledge accumulated gradually. And because written medical records from ancient Persia are limited compared with later periods, much of this early knowledge is difficult to reconstruct precisely. This is especially important when discussing substances that may have affected consciousness. Modern readers often search ancient history for plants that could produce unusual sensations. But ancient people did not necessarily use these plants for that reason. A substance that makes a person sleepy might have been valued because it reduced pain. A substance that produces stimulation might have been valued because it helped someone remain awake. A substance that changes perception might have been regarded as dangerous rather than desirable. The purpose matters. And the ancient Persian world had many reasons to use powerful substances without seeking intoxication. Pain was unavoidable. Infections were common. Injuries occurred. Digestive problems occurred. Fevers occurred. Sleep could be difficult. And there were few reliable treatments. A plant that offered even temporary relief could be extremely valuable. This is one reason the ancient knowledge of herbs deserves to be understood on its own terms. It was not necessarily a primitive version of recreational drug culture. It was a practical response to living in a world without modern medicine. Imagine the quiet interior of an ancient household. There is no modern cabinet filled with packaged medicines. Instead, there might be containers holding dried plant material, oils, seeds, spices, or other useful substances. Some ingredients could be prepared when needed. Others could be stored. The appearance of each plant would be familiar to someone who had worked with it for years. Its smell could identify it immediately. Its taste could be remembered. Its preparation could follow tradition. There is something deeply human about this kind of knowledge. The natural world becomes a living pharmacy. But this pharmacy is unpredictable. Two plants may look similar while having completely different effects. A harmless substance may resemble a dangerous one. The wrong preparation may destroy useful properties. Too much may become toxic. Ancient healers therefore needed careful knowledge, even if they did not understand chemistry. They learned through experience. And experience could sometimes be painful. Some substances used in ancient medicine could affect the nervous system. Painkillers, sedatives, stimulants, and other powerful preparations were known in different parts of the ancient world. Opium, for example, has a very long history of human use, particularly in the broader Mediterranean and Near Eastern world. But connecting every ancient reference to Persia specifically requires caution. The ancient Iranian world was part of a network where plants and medical knowledge could travel, yet evidence for exactly how a particular substance was used in a particular Persian community may be incomplete. This distinction is important. It is easy to take evidence from one ancient civilization and automatically apply it to another. History does not work that way. The fact that a substance existed somewhere nearby does not prove that every Persian household used it. The fact that a plant had a known medicinal property does not prove that people consumed it recreationally. And the fact that a substance could alter consciousness does not mean that altered consciousness was its purpose. These distinctions allow the ancient world to remain interesting without turning uncertainty into fact. There is another important category of substances. Aromatic plants. Ancient people understood the power of smell. Fragrant oils, resins, herbs, and flowers were valuable. They could be used in personal care. They could be included in medicine. They could accompany religious practices. And they could make an environment feel pleasant. A fragrance can influence mood without producing intoxication. The smell of a familiar plant can bring memories. A pleasant aroma can create calm. Strong scents can make a room feel completely different. Ancient people did not need modern neuroscience to recognize this. They experienced it directly. In a ritual environment, fragrance could become part of the atmosphere. Smoke rising slowly. Oil warming gently. Flowers releasing their scent. Herbs crushed into preparations. These sensory experiences could make ceremonies feel unusual or sacred. Again, this does not necessarily mean hallucination. The atmosphere itself could be powerful. Ancient Persian religious traditions placed importance on purity, and the senses could be involved in expressing that purity. Clean water, fresh plants, fire, fragrance, careful ritual movements. Together, these elements created an environment very different from ordinary daily life. The mind responds to environments. A quiet room can encourage calm. A dark space can encourage introspection. A crowded place can create excitement. A sacred environment can create awe. The ancient Persians understood these effects through lived experience. They knew that surroundings influenced how people felt. This becomes especially relevant when thinking about altered consciousness. A substance is only one part of an experience. The mind entering the experience is another. The environment is another. Expectation is another. Ritual is another. And the meaning attached to the experience can transform it completely. A medicinal drink taken to relieve pain would feel different from the same drink taken during a religious ceremony. A strong fragrance used for personal comfort would feel different from the same fragrance filling a sacred space. A glass of wine during an ordinary meal would feel different from wine consumed during an elaborate royal celebration. Context changes experience. As the night continues, the ancient Persian world becomes quieter. The plants are sleeping beneath the moon. The mountains remain dark. The gardens are still. The vessels containing herbs and oils rest inside ancient homes. Some substances will be used when morning comes. Others will remain stored. Some will help. Some will disappoint. Some may harm. And some will become forgotten entirely. Thousands of years later, we can recover only fragments of this enormous body of knowledge. But those fragments reveal something important. Ancient Persians did not see plants merely as scenery. Plants were food, medicine, perfume, fuel, ritual material, trade goods, and sometimes sources of altered physical or mental states. The natural world was deeply connected to everyday survival. And perhaps that is the best place to pause. Before asking which ancient substances could change consciousness, we must first understand why people used plants at all. They were searching for relief, for healing, for strength, for comfort, for protection, for ritual meaning, and sometimes, perhaps, for unusual experiences. The boundaries between these purposes were not always clear. The ancient Persian night remains peaceful. The scent of herbs seems to linger in the imagination. A small flame burns beside a quiet room. The mountains wait beyond the darkness. And the ancient knowledge of plants remains scattered across history like fragments of an enormous forgotten garden. Slowly, the journey continues. Quietly. Without hurry. Toward the places where medicine, ritual, and altered consciousness once met. Where medicine met the mind. The ancient Persian night continues beneath a sky filled with quiet stars. The world of medicine is still around us, but now our attention moves toward a more mysterious boundary. The boundary between healing the body and changing the mind. In the ancient world, these two things were not always separated. Pain lived in the body, but it also affected the mind. Illness could create fear. Exhaustion could change perception. A fever could produce strange dreams. Lack of sleep could make ordinary surroundings feel unfamiliar. And certain medicines could influence both physical sensations and awareness. Ancient healers observed these connections even without modern knowledge of the nervous system. They knew that a person in pain behaved differently from someone who was comfortable. They knew that sleep changed the body. They knew that fever could produce confusion. They knew that strong medicines could make a person drowsy or unusually alert. The language was different, but the observations were real. This is where the story of ancient substances becomes more complicated. A modern category such as psychoactive can include many different kinds of materials. Some substances stimulate. Some sedate. Some reduce pain. Some influence mood. Some cause changes in perception. Some produce sleep. And some can be toxic. Ancient people encountered many of these effects without having a single scientific category that contained them all. A plant was often understood by what it did. It could be called useful because it relieved pain. Another might be valued because it helped digestion. Another because it encouraged sleep. Another because it seemed to strengthen the body. The effect mattered more than the chemical explanation. And because knowledge was passed through practical experience, the same plant could have several uses. One preparation might be weak. Another might be concentrated. One might be applied to the skin. Another might be consumed. The method could completely change the experience. This was especially important with powerful substances. The difference between a small amount and a large amount could be enormous. Ancient healers therefore had to learn something that modern medicine continues to emphasize. Dose matters. Preparation matters. The condition of the patient matters. And the combination with other substances matters. The ancient Persian world had access to a wide range of medicinal traditions. Some knowledge came from local Iranian practices. Other ideas may have traveled through the enormous territories connected by Persian rule and trade. Mesopotamian traditions were especially important in the broader Near Eastern world. Greek medical ideas later became increasingly influential in Iranian lands. Central Asian and Indian knowledge could also travel through networks of exchange. But these traditions did not simply merge into one system. They interacted over centuries. And this created a complicated landscape of medical knowledge. Some remedies were probably effective. Some may have had modest effects. Some may have been based on mistaken assumptions. And some could have been genuinely dangerous. There was no modern system of controlled clinical trials. A remedy might become accepted because people believed it worked. If a person recovered after using it, the remedy received another layer of credibility. If the person did not recover, the explanation could be illness severity, incorrect preparation, or another cause. This made medical knowledge difficult to evaluate. Yet it also meant that useful observations could survive. A plant that consistently helped a particular problem would be remembered. A preparation that repeatedly caused harm might eventually be avoided. Over many generations, practical knowledge could become surprisingly sophisticated. The most fascinating substances are those that could influence consciousness. Pain-relieving plants are an obvious example. When pain decreases, the entire experience of the world changes. The body relaxes. Attention is freed from constant discomfort. Sleep becomes easier. The mind may feel calmer. This is technically an alteration of consciousness, even if the purpose is healing. That distinction is important. Ancient people may have experienced altered states without seeking intoxication. Sleep itself is an altered state. So is deep relaxation. So is intense fatigue. So is fever. So is meditation or prolonged prayer. So is grief. The human mind changes constantly. Substances are only one method of changing it. Religious ritual could also create unusual states of awareness. Repeated prayers. Rhythmic recitation. Long periods of concentration. darkness, firelight, fasting, expectation. These experiences could become psychologically powerful, and when combined with substances, their effects might become even more difficult to separate. This is one reason it is dangerous to look at an ancient ritual and immediately assume that a plant was responsible for every unusual experience. The ritual itself may have contributed. The setting may have contributed. Belief may have contributed. And the physical substance may have contributed. Ancient Persian religious life contained many elements capable of creating a powerful sensory environment. Fire was visually striking. Water had importance. Fragrance could fill a space. Words could be repeated. Sacred objects could focus attention. And ritual could separate ordinary time from sacred time. For someone participating in such a ceremony, the world might feel temporarily different. Not necessarily because of hallucinations. Sometimes simply because attention had been narrowed. Ordinary distractions had been removed. The senses were focused. The mind was prepared for something meaningful. Modern psychology recognizes that expectation can influence experience. Ancient people did not use that terminology, but they understood expectation intuitively. If a substance was believed to possess sacred power, consuming it could carry enormous psychological significance. This may help explain why Hauma remained important even though its exact botanical identity is uncertain. The ritual meaning survived. The name survived. The preparation survived. The belief in its sacred value survived. The physical plant may have changed, but the ritual remained meaningful. This also reminds us that the word drug can be misleading when applied to ancient religious substances. Modern society tends to divide substances according to legal, medical, and recreational categories. Ancient societies used different systems of classification. A sacred preparation could be simultaneously a plant product, medicine, offering, and symbol. A fermented drink could be food, hospitality, celebration, and intoxicant. A fragrant resin could be perfume and ritual material. The same object could belong to several categories at once. This overlapping world makes ancient Persia fascinating. There was no bright line separating the kitchen, the medicine cabinet, and the temple. Plants moved between these spaces. A herb might be used in cooking. Another might be placed into a medicinal preparation. Another might appear in a ritual. The knowledge of plants therefore connected everyday life with sacred life. And this connection may have affected how people understood the human body. The body was not simply a machine. It was part of a larger moral and cosmic order. Purity mattered. Health mattered. Food mattered. Water mattered. Fire mattered. And the substances entering the body could therefore carry cultural significance. The ancient Iranian world also understood that nature could be dangerous. Poisonous plants existed. Venomous animals existed. Spoiled food existed. Contaminated water existed. The boundary between healing and harm was not abstract. It was part of daily survival. A healer who knew plants possessed valuable knowledge. But that knowledge also carried responsibility. The wrong plant could harm. The wrong dose could harm. The wrong preparation could harm. And the wrong assumption could harm. This makes the ancient Persian relationship with medicinal substances more cautious than the popular image of ancient people experimenting freely with every plant around them. Most useful knowledge was probably practical. People needed remedies that worked. They needed treatments that could be repeated. They needed methods that could be taught. And they needed to recognize dangerous materials. The search for intoxication was only one possible motivation, and probably not the dominant one. most people had more immediate concerns: food, water, shelter, work, family, illness, travel, survival. An unusual mental experience might be interesting, but it was not necessarily a priority. Still, curiosity about the mind is ancient. Dreams were mysterious. Sleep was mysterious. Death was mysterious. Illness was mysterious. People naturally wondered what happened inside the body. When a plant caused a strange sensation, it was difficult not to notice. Perhaps it created warmth. Perhaps it produced sleep. Perhaps it reduced pain. Perhaps it made the senses feel unusual. Such experiences could become part of cultural memory. And over generations, some plants became associated with special powers. The night becomes quieter now. The ancient household has settled. The stored herbs remain in their containers. The oils rest in small vessels. The medicinal preparations wait for morning. Outside, the gardens are dark. A faint breeze passes through the leaves. The air carries the smell of earth. Nothing dramatic is happening. And perhaps that is exactly how most ancient medicine existed. Quietly. Practically. Perfume, smoke, and sacred spaces. The power of fragrance. The night over ancient Persia has become deeper still. The vineyards are quiet. The gardens have disappeared into darkness. The vessels of wine and medicine have been set aside. And now the journey moves toward something less obvious, yet deeply important in the ancient world. Scent. Today, fragrance can seem like a small detail. A pleasant perfume. The smell of flowers. The aroma of burning wood. A familiar scent drifting through a room. But in ancient Persia, as in many ancient societies, fragrance could carry much greater meaning. It could signal cleanliness. It could create comfort. It could accompany medicine. It could mark ceremony. It could communicate wealth. And within sacred spaces, fragrance could help transform an ordinary environment into something that felt entirely different. The ancient Persian world contained many sources of fragrance. Flowers grew in gardens. Aromatic herbs grew in different regions. Resins and fragrant materials could be obtained through trade. Oils could absorb the scents of plants. Spices could add powerful aromas to food and drink. Wood could release fragrance when burned. Each scent belonged to the sensory landscape of ancient life. And smell was especially powerful because it enters awareness without requiring deliberate attention. A person does not need to look at a fragrance. There is no need to touch it. The scent simply arrives. It can immediately change the atmosphere of a place. The smell of fresh flowers can make a courtyard feel peaceful. The smell of smoke can suggest warmth. The smell of herbs can remind someone of medicine. The smell of food can create hunger. The smell of a familiar plant can awaken memory. Ancient people experienced all of this, even though they did not describe it using modern neuroscience. They knew that fragrance mattered. This becomes particularly interesting when we consider ritual. Religious ceremonies often depend upon the senses. Visual symbols. Sacred words. Music. Movement. Touch. Taste. And smell. A ceremony becomes more immersive when several senses are involved at once. In an ancient Persian setting, fire could provide light and warmth. Water could provide coolness and purity. Plants could provide color and fragrance. Oil could carry perfume. Smoke could slowly fill the surrounding air. Together, these elements created an environment unlike ordinary daily life. The transformation could be subtle. Nothing supernatural needed to occur. Simply entering a carefully prepared sacred space could change how a person felt. The air smelled different. The lighting was different. The sounds were different. The movements were slower. The attention became focused. The mind recognized that something unusual was happening. This is one way to understand ancient ritual without assuming that every ceremony involved intoxication. A powerful experience does not necessarily require a psychoactive substance. Human beings can experience awe through architecture. Silence can feel profound. Darkness can change perception. Firelight can make familiar objects appear unfamiliar. Repetition can alter awareness. Fragrance can bring memories to the surface. And religious expectation can give ordinary sensations extraordinary meaning. The ancient Persian world understood this sensory power. Persian gardens are an especially useful example. Gardens were not simply collections of plants. They could be carefully designed spaces where water, shade, trees, flowers, pathways, and architecture were brought together. The garden created an environment of controlled nature. Outside the garden might be dry land, heat, dust, open plains. Inside, there could be water, shade, fragrance, greenery. The contrast would have been powerful. The garden itself could become a place of relief. And at night, the experience would change again. The heat would disappear. The air would cool. The scent of plants might become more noticeable. Water channels would reflect small points of light. The sky would open above the trees. A garden after sunset could feel almost separate from the world beyond its walls. Within such spaces, fragrance could become part of relaxation. Flowers released their scent. Oils might be used on the body. Aromatic materials could be burned. Food added its own smells. Wine added another. The human senses were surrounded from every direction. This matters when thinking about the ancient experience of altered states. The mind does not respond only to chemicals. It responds to environments. A person who is tired, relaxed, surrounded by pleasant smells, listening to repetitive sounds, and participating in a meaningful ritual may experience consciousness differently from someone standing in an ordinary marketplace. The change may be subtle. It may simply feel peaceful. But the experience is still different. Ancient people understood this through practice. They created spaces designed to produce particular feelings. Royal architecture could create awe. Gardens could create calm. Temples could create reverence. Banquets could create pleasure. And funerary spaces could create solemnity. The environment itself became part of the message. Fragrance could strengthen that message. There is also a connection between perfume and personal care. In a world without modern soap, deodorants, and synthetic fragrances, natural oils and aromatic materials were valuable. People wanted to smell pleasant. Perfumed oils could be applied to the body. Fragrant materials could be used on clothing or in living spaces. This was partly practical. It was also social. A pleasant scent could signal refinement and wealth. Rare aromatic substances might travel long distances before reaching wealthy households. Trade therefore played an important role in the ancient perfume economy. Persian territories connected many regions. Goods could travel through imperial networks. Aromatic materials could come from distant landscapes. Some plants grew locally. Others had to be imported. The presence of a particular fragrance could therefore reveal connections between distant peoples. A small amount of resin could carry the geography of an entire trade network. This is one of the beautiful contradictions of ancient fragrance. A scent seems temporary. It appears. It fills the air. And then it disappears. Yet the material producing it may have traveled hundreds or thousands of kilometers. A tiny quantity of aromatic resin could represent a long journey. The person smelling it might never know where it originated. They would simply experience the fragrance. This makes perfume an invisible form of history. Unlike stone, it rarely survives archaeologically. A palace can remain for thousands of years. A scent usually cannot. We can recover containers. We can sometimes identify residue. We can study written descriptions. But the original smell is gone. This is another reason the ancient world can feel distant. We can see its ruins. We can touch its surviving objects. But we cannot smell the ancient Persian garden. We cannot know exactly what a royal banquet smelled like. We cannot breathe the air of an ancient temple. Those sensory experiences disappeared with the people who experienced them. And yet, through plants and materials, we can make educated approximations. Flowers, oils, smoke, wood, herbs, spices, food, wine, water, earth. The ancient environment would have been full of smells. Some pleasant, some unpleasant, some familiar, some strange, and some sacred. Smoke deserves special attention. Smoke changes the atmosphere of a space almost immediately. A flame burns. The material disappears. Smoke rises. The scent spreads. The air becomes visible. In darkness, smoke can appear almost solid as it moves through light. This makes it naturally suited to ritual. It creates movement in an otherwise still room. It connects fire with air. And it carries fragrance beyond the object producing it. Ancient people used burning aromatic materials in many cultures, although the exact practices varied between regions and periods. In Persian religious contexts, fire itself held profound importance. Zoroastrian traditions developed a strong relationship with fire as a symbol of purity and divine presence. But this should not be confused with the idea that smoke itself necessarily produced altered consciousness. The sacred significance came from religious meaning, not automatically from inhaling something. This distinction matters. Modern descriptions sometimes transform every ancient ritual into a psychedelic ceremony. The evidence rarely supports such certainty. Smoke can create atmosphere without causing hallucinations. Fragrance can create calm without intoxication. Firelight can produce awe without changing the chemistry of the brain. And ritual can alter awareness through attention and expectation alone. The ancient Persian world was full of such experiences. Perhaps the most important effect of fragrance was simply that it made the sacred world feel different from ordinary life. A familiar environment became special. A room smelled unlike a household. The air carried flowers, oils, or smoke. The senses recognized that this was not an ordinary moment. The mind followed. As the night deepens, imagine an ancient garden after the heat has disappeared. The water is cool. The flowers are almost invisible. Leaves move gently in the breeze. Somewhere nearby, a small fire burns. A faint fragrance rises with the smoke. Nothing dramatic happens. There is simply a change in atmosphere. The body relaxes. The senses become quieter. The mind slows. And the ancient world feels distant from the noise of modern life. When the air became sacred, the ancient Persian garden rests quietly beneath the evening sky. The last warmth of the day is disappearing from the stones. Water moves gently through narrow channels. leaves shift in the cool air. And somewhere nearby, a small fire continues to burn. There is no rush. No loud movement. Only the soft sounds of an ancient evening. Into this quiet atmosphere comes fragrance. A little smoke rises. Aromatic material burns slowly. The scent spreads through the air, reaching places that the eye cannot see. For the people standing nearby, the environment has changed. Nothing physical has been built. No wall has moved. No object has been transformed. Yet the air itself feels different. This was one of the quiet powers of fragrance. It could make an ordinary space feel special. In ancient religious life, this mattered. Sacred places were not only defined by architecture. They were also defined by what happened inside them. Words were spoken. Ritual actions were performed. Fire was tended. Water was respected. And the senses were drawn into the experience. Smell could become part of that process. The fragrance of plants and burning materials could help separate sacred time from ordinary time. A person entering such a space might immediately recognize that something different was happening. The air itself carried a message. Slow down. Pay attention. Observe. Remember. The ancient Iranian religious world placed great importance on order and purity. Later Zoroastrian traditions developed elaborate understandings of purity, fire, water, and ritual practice. These ideas evolved across centuries, so we should not imagine that every practice remained identical from the earliest Iranian period through later Persian history. But the importance of purity and sacred order is an enduring feature of Iranian religious tradition. Within this world, fire held an especially important place. Fire was visible. It gave warmth. It illuminated darkness. It transformed wood into heat and light. It could also appear almost alive. A flame moves constantly, yet remains in one place. It produces light without becoming solid. It disappears when its fuel is gone. For ancient people, such qualities naturally encouraged symbolic thinking. Fire could represent purity, vitality, and divine presence. But fire was not necessarily worshipped in the simple sense sometimes suggested by outsiders. Zoroastrian religious practice treated fire as sacred and worthy of careful preservation and respect. The distinction is important. Fire was part of a larger religious system. It existed within a world of prayers, purity, truth, ritual responsibility, and cosmic order. And when fragrance entered that environment, the senses became part of the experience. Imagine standing near a sacred fire at dusk. The surroundings are quiet. The flame moves gently. The air is cool. There is a faint smell of burning material. The eyes follow the light. The ears hear the ritual words. The body becomes still. Attention becomes focused. This could create an unusual state of awareness without requiring an intoxicating substance. The mind is being directed toward a single environment. Modern people experience something similar in many quiet settings. A candle in a dark room can feel calming. The sound of rain can encourage relaxation. The smell of incense can create a sense of ritual. A quiet place can make thoughts seem slower. None of these experiences necessarily involve drugs. They are changes in attention. Ancient people were capable of experiencing the same basic psychological effects. This is important because the topic of ancient intoxication can sometimes become exaggerated. Not every strange feeling described in an ancient religious context was caused by a plant. Not every sacred experience was a hallucination. Sometimes the environment itself was powerful. Sometimes belief was powerful. Sometimes expectation was powerful. And sometimes the experience may simply have been ordinary human emotion interpreted through a religious worldview. A person who believes they are standing in a sacred place will naturally pay attention differently. Every sound may seem important. Every flame may seem meaningful. Every word may feel significant. The mind becomes receptive. And fragrance can strengthen that atmosphere. Smell is closely connected with memory. A particular scent can bring back a place or experience almost instantly. Ancient people, like modern people, would have noticed this even without understanding the neurological mechanisms behind it. The scent of a familiar herb could recall a household. The smell of smoke could recall a fire. The fragrance of flowers could recall a garden. The smell of certain oils could recall ceremonies. A sacred scent could therefore become associated with sacred memory. Years later, encountering the same fragrance might bring those feelings back. This may have helped rituals remain emotionally powerful across generations. Tradition was not preserved only through words. It could also be preserved through repeated sensory experiences. The same prayers, the same movements, the same flames, the same fragrances, the same places. Together, they created continuity. And continuity was deeply important in ancient religious life. The past was not simply gone. It could be present through ritual. A person repeating an ancient prayer was participating in something much older than themselves. A person tending a sacred fire was continuing an established tradition. A person using traditional plants or fragrances was maintaining a connection with earlier generations. This is one reason ancient rituals could feel timeless. They were designed to repeat. The individual changed. The world changed. Empires rose and fell. Languages evolved. But the ritual could continue. Fragrance, however, was especially temporary. It appeared for a few moments and then disappeared. This made it almost perfectly suited to ritual. A scent could announce the beginning of something. It could fill a space. It could linger briefly. And then it could vanish. The temporary nature of fragrance mirrors the temporary nature of human experience. A moment arrives. We experience it. And then it is gone. Only memory remains. Perhaps ancient people understood this intuitively. They lived in a world where many things were temporary. Smoke disappeared. Flowers faded. Food was eaten. Wine was consumed. Fire burned down. Human life itself was short. Ritual created continuity within that impermanence. A ceremony could be repeated even though individual people passed away. The sacred fire could continue even when generations changed. The tradition could outlive the person. This gives the ancient Persian relationship with fire and fragrance a quiet emotional quality. It was not simply about creating pleasant smells. It was about creating a connection between the senses and the sacred. And once again, we return to the question of altered consciousness. What does it mean to feel different? Perhaps it does not always mean seeing things that are not there. Perhaps it can mean feeling unusually focused. Feeling deeply peaceful. Feeling connected to a place. Feeling that ordinary time has slowed. Feeling that a familiar environment has become meaningful. These experiences can be powerful. They can even feel extraordinary. But they do not require intoxication. Ancient rituals could produce these sensations naturally. And if a sacred substance such as haumar was also present, its effects would have existed within this carefully constructed environment. The plant would not have been experienced in isolation. It would have been surrounded by ritual, prayer, fragrance, fire, expectation, tradition, meaning. This makes the ancient Iranian experience of sacred substances much more complex than simply asking whether a particular plant caused a high. The experience belonged to a complete world. The substance was one element. The ritual was another. The person was another. The surroundings were another. The meaning was another. Together, they formed something that cannot be reconstructed perfectly thousands of years later. And perhaps that is enough. We do not need to invent visions or hallucinations. We can simply imagine the quiet. A flame moving in darkness. A faint fragrance in the air. Ancient words spoken slowly. A garden resting beneath the stars. Water passing gently through a channel. A person standing still and listening. The body becoming calm. The mind becoming attentive. The ordinary world becoming distant for a little while. That itself can be an altered state. Not because reality has disappeared, but because attention has changed. The ancient Persian night grows darker. The fragrance begins to fade. The smoke becomes thinner. The fire continues to glow. Beyond the sacred space, the wider landscape remains silent. Mountains rise in the distance. Gardens rest. Rivers continue their slow movement. And the people who once stood beside those fires are long gone. Yet their rituals left traces. In texts. In archaeology. In surviving religious traditions. And in the questions we still ask. What did they smell? What did they taste? What did they feel? What did they believe? We may never know every answer. But the mystery itself allows us to slow down. To imagine the ancient world without rushing through it. To remember that altered consciousness does not always begin with a substance. Sometimes it begins with silence. With darkness. With repetition. With fragrance. With fire. With belief. And with the simple human ability to become completely absorbed in a moment. The fire burns lower now. The garden is quiet. Dreams, sleep, and the altered mind. The ancient Persian world of dreams. The night is deep now. The gardens are quiet. The fires have become small points of light, and the fragrance that once filled the air has almost disappeared. Across the ancient Persian landscape, people are beginning to sleep. Some rest in peaceful homes. Some sleep beneath simple roofs. Others rest within great estates and royal residences. The differences between them may have been enormous. Yet once the eyes closed and the body became still, another world became available to everyone. The world of dreams. Dreams were among the oldest mysteries known to humanity. Long before anyone understood the brain scientifically, people wondered where dreams came from. Were they messages? Memories? Warnings? Visions? Or simply strange images created by the sleeping mind? Ancient Persian cultures developed their own ways of understanding this mysterious state. Dreams could be treated as meaningful. They might be remembered carefully. They might be interpreted. And sometimes they could become connected with religion, prophecy, or ideas about the future. This is important when exploring altered states in ancient Persia. Not every altered state came from a substance. Sleep itself could completely transform consciousness. During the day, a person experiences the world through ordinary senses. The eyes see the landscape. The ears hear voices. The body feels temperature. The mind responds to events. But during sleep, the external world becomes quieter. The body rests. The mind creates its own images. A person can travel through places that do not exist. They can meet people who are far away. They can experience fear without physical danger. They can feel happiness without anything happening around them. They can even experience impossible events while believing, for a time, that everything is real. This is one of the most remarkable natural altered states available to human beings. Ancient people did not need drugs to experience another world. They only needed sleep. And because dreams could feel so real, it is easy to understand why ancient societies sometimes gave them special importance. Imagine waking after a vivid dream. The room is still dark. The fire has almost disappeared. The dream remains in the mind. For a few moments, the boundary between dream and waking may feel uncertain. A person remembers a face, a place, a voice, a strange journey. Perhaps the dream felt peaceful. Perhaps it was frightening. Perhaps it seemed to contain a message. The ancient mind had no modern explanation for these experiences. So dreams naturally became part of religious and philosophical thought. In Persian traditions, dreams could sometimes be associated with supernatural knowledge or symbolic meaning. Ancient Iranian literature contains stories in which dreams play important roles. One of the most famous examples appears in the Shahnameh, the great Persian epic compiled many centuries later by Ferdowsi. Its stories preserve older Iranian traditions, including dreams, omens, heroes, kings, and supernatural events. Although the Shahnameh is not a direct record of Achaemenid-era daily life, it demonstrates how deeply dream imagery could remain embedded in Persian storytelling. Dreams were part of the cultural imagination. They belong to the mysterious territory between ordinary awareness and something unknown. This does not mean ancient Persians believed every dream predicted the future. People have always had different attitudes toward dreams. Some are ignored. Some are remembered. Some are interpreted. Some are feared. Some are treasured. The same would have been true in ancient societies. A person might wake from a dream and simply return to sleep. Another might tell the dream to someone else. A ruler might take an unusual dream seriously. A religious specialist might interpret symbols. The response depended upon the individual and the cultural setting. Dream interpretation was also not unique to Persia. Across the ancient Near East, people recorded and interpreted dreams. Mesopotamian civilizations developed extensive traditions of dream interpretation. These cultures interacted with the wider Iranian world over long periods. Ideas could travel across borders. Stories could move between languages. Religious traditions could influence one another. So the Persian understanding of dreams developed within a much larger ancient landscape of ideas. Yet the physical experience of dreaming remained universal. The mind becomes detached from the immediate environment. The body rests. Time becomes strange. A dream that lasts only a few minutes can feel like an entire journey. Locations can change instantly. People can appear and disappear. Gravity may stop behaving normally. The dead may appear alive. The impossible can become ordinary. And when we wake, the dream disappears rapidly. This fleeting quality may have made dreams seem especially mysterious to ancient people. A vision could arrive without warning and disappear without leaving physical evidence. There was nothing to touch. Nothing to preserve. Only memory. This is similar to the problem we encountered with ancient fragrance. Some of the most powerful human experiences leave almost no archaeological trace. A dream leaves nothing behind. A sensation disappears. A moment of intoxication ends. A prayer concludes. A fragrance fades. A thought vanishes. History is therefore much better at preserving objects than experiences. We have ancient vessels. We have buildings. We have inscriptions. We have tools. But we cannot excavate an ancient dream. We can only read what someone wrote about dreams. This limitation should make us cautious. It should also make us curious. Because dreams may have influenced how ancient people thought about altered consciousness more generally. If someone already believed that the mind could travel through strange worlds during sleep, then unusual experiences caused by plants or rituals might be interpreted through that same framework. The boundaries between dreams, visions, prophecy, and religious experience could become difficult to separate. A person might experience something unusual and interpret it according to their beliefs. This is not evidence that the experience was false. It simply means that human beings understand experiences through cultural frameworks. The same sensation can receive different meanings in different societies. A modern person might describe a vivid dream using psychological language. An ancient person might describe it as a message or omen. The experience may be similar. The interpretation is different. This distinction is essential for understanding ancient Persia. The people living there were not simply waiting for modern science to explain their experiences. They had their own explanations. They lived within religious traditions that gave meaning to life, death, dreams, illness, nature, and the unseen world. These ideas shaped how unusual experiences were understood. Sleep itself could therefore become part of spiritual imagination. Night was a special time. The ordinary world became quieter. The darkness reduced visual information. The mind turned inward. Stars filled the sky. Firelight became more important. Dreams appeared. And perhaps the boundary between waking life and the invisible world felt thinner. For someone living thousands of years ago, the night could be mysterious in a way modern cities rarely allow. There were no electric streetlights. No glowing screens. No constant traffic. Once the household fire became small, darkness surrounded the home. The stars were brighter. The sounds of animals were clearer. Wind could be heard moving through trees. A person lying awake could feel the enormous darkness outside. Then sleep would arrive. The mind would begin its journey. Perhaps there would be no dream at all. Perhaps there would be a confusing sequence of images. Perhaps a beautiful landscape. Perhaps a frightening encounter. Perhaps a dream that remained unforgettable for years. This is where our understanding of getting high becomes broader. Altered consciousness is not limited to intoxication. Human beings enter altered states naturally. Sleep, dreaming, meditation, fasting, prayer, exhaustion, grief, fever, deep concentration. These experiences can change perception and emotion. Ancient people lived through all of them, and they gave them meaning. The ancient Persian world therefore contained many pathways into unusual states of awareness. Some were natural. Some were religious. Some were medicinal. Some involved food or drink. Some may have involved plants. But none existed separately from culture. The person experiencing the state already carried beliefs, memories, expectations, and fears. The mind was never empty. It entered the experience carrying the entire world with it. As the night grows quieter, the ancient Persian landscape becomes almost invisible. The gardens are dark. The mountains are silhouettes. The fires are fading. Inside the homes, people sleep. And behind closed eyes, countless private worlds are unfolding. Some dreams will disappear before morning. Others will be remembered. A few may become stories. And perhaps one dream will be interpreted as a message from beyond the ordinary world. The sleeping mind continues its mysterious work. No plant is required. No wine is required. No smoke is required. The human brain itself is enough. And perhaps this is one of the oldest altered states of all. The simple act of closing one's eyes and entering a world created from within. The night remains peaceful. The stars continue their slow movement. The ancient landscape sleeps. And somewhere between waking and dreaming. Visions between sleeping and waking. The ancient Persian night has become almost completely still. The houses are quiet. The gardens are dark. The last lamps burn softly, and beyond the walls, the landscape stretches beneath a sky crowded with stars. Inside the sleeping world, another kind of journey has begun. The body rests. The eyes are closed. But the mind continues to move. Dreams can be strange because they do not follow the rules of ordinary life. A person may find themselves walking through a familiar garden only to discover that the garden has suddenly become a mountain. A voice may be heard without anyone being present. A familiar face may appear after many years. Someone who has died may seem completely alive. A distant place may appear as if it were only a few steps away. And then, without warning, the entire dream disappears. Ancient people had no reason to find this ordinary. Dreams could feel mysterious, powerful, and sometimes frightening. In Persian cultural traditions, dreams could become associated with signs, warnings, and visions. But there was an important difference between having a dream and believing that every dream contained a message. People have always dreamed more often than they have received what they considered meaningful dreams. Most dreams probably disappeared into forgetfulness. A few remained. Those unusual dreams were the ones people remembered and discussed. This created a natural tendency for remarkable dreams to become culturally important. A strange dream could become a story. A story could become tradition. And tradition could survive for generations. Ancient Persian literature contains many examples of dreams and visions playing symbolic roles. Kings, heroes, and legendary figures can encounter dreams that seem to reveal something about the future. These stories are not straightforward historical records. They were shaped by storytelling, religion, poetry, and centuries of transmission. But they reveal something about the Persian imagination. The boundary between ordinary life and the mysterious world beyond it could be represented through dreams. The dream became a doorway. Not necessarily a literal doorway, but a symbolic one. It allowed storytellers to explore questions that could not easily be answered while awake. What will happen? What is hidden? What does fate hold? What does the future mean? What lies beyond ordinary human knowledge? Dreams provided a language for these questions. And there is another reason dreams are relevant to altered consciousness. The experience of dreaming demonstrates that the mind can construct an entire reality without receiving ordinary information from the outside world. During a vivid dream, a person may see landscapes, hear voices, experience emotions, and move through a story. Yet the physical body may be lying completely still. This is extraordinary. It means that human consciousness is capable of generating experiences internally. Ancient people did not know the neurological mechanisms behind dreaming. But they experienced the result. And perhaps this helped make other unusual states of awareness easier to understand. If the mind could create a world during sleep, then unusual experiences during ritual or illness might also seem possible. A vision did not necessarily need to be explained as a chemical effect. It could be understood spiritually. A fever might produce strange images. Exhaustion might cause confusion. A person waking suddenly in darkness might briefly see shapes that were not really there. Strong emotion could affect perception. Ancient people experienced all of these things. Without modern neuroscience, the explanations naturally came from the cultural world around them. Religion provided one framework. Medicine provided another. Storytelling provided another. An ordinary experience provided yet another. This mixture makes ancient accounts difficult to interpret. When an old text describes a vision, we cannot automatically determine whether the writer was describing a dream, a religious experience, a metaphor, an illness, or a literary device. Sometimes it may have been several of these at once. This uncertainty is part of ancient history. It is better to preserve the mystery than to invent certainty. There is also the quiet experience of waking. This moment can be almost as strange as dreaming. Imagine a person sleeping through the final hours of darkness. Then gradually, awareness returns. The room becomes recognizable. The body becomes heavy. The dream is still present for a few seconds. Then it begins to disappear. A sound from outside enters awareness. Perhaps a bird. Perhaps footsteps. Perhaps wind. The mind reconnects with the physical world. For a brief moment, two realities overlap. The dream is fading. The waking world is returning. This transition is peaceful, but it can also be confusing. Ancient people would have experienced it just as we do. And perhaps the darkness of an ancient home made the transition even more striking. Without electric lights, waking did not necessarily mean immediate brightness. A person could open their eyes and still see almost nothing. The dream might remain vivid while the room stayed dark. The boundaries between inner and outer experience could feel unusually soft. Night also encouraged reflection. After sunset, daily work slowed. The world became quieter. People had fewer distractions. The mind could turn inward. This does not mean that ancient people spent every night contemplating dreams. Most were probably simply tired. Life was physically demanding. Sleep was valuable. But the quietness of night created conditions in which dreams could be remembered and discussed. The stars were visible. The darkness was deep. The natural sounds of the environment became clearer. The night itself could feel like a different world. And this brings us back to the larger theme of ancient altered states. There was no single way to change consciousness. Wine could relax the body. Certain medicinal preparations could relieve pain or induce sleep. Sacred rituals could focus attention. Fragrance could change atmosphere. Dreams could create entire imaginary worlds. Fasting could alter physical sensation. Prayer could produce deep concentration. And exhaustion could transform perception. The human mind was always capable of crossing different thresholds. The ancient Persians lived among these thresholds without having the modern vocabulary we use today. They did not need the term altered state of consciousness to recognize that people could feel different. They knew the difference between waking and sleeping, between sickness and health, between sobriety and drunkenness, between ordinary conversation and religious ceremony, between a normal night and an unforgettable dream. Their categories were shaped by their own beliefs. Those beliefs deserve to be understood rather than replaced with modern assumptions. This is especially important when discussing Haumar. The mysterious sacred preparation may have had physical effects. But if it did, those effects occurred within a religious environment where people already had ideas about vitality, sacred power, ritual, and divine order. The experience could therefore have been interpreted through those ideas. A modern person might ask, what did it feel like? An ancient worshipper might have asked a different question. What did it mean? Both questions are valuable. But they are not the same. The first searches for sensation. The second searches for significance. Ancient history gives us more evidence for meaning than for sensation. Texts tell us what people believed. Rituals show us what they valued. Objects reveal what they used. But the private feeling inside a person's mind is almost impossible to recover. Perhaps that is why dreams are such a fitting subject. A dream can be experienced completely by one person and remain invisible to everyone else. No one standing outside the sleeping room can see exactly what the dreamer sees. The experience belongs entirely to the dreamer. And once it ends, even the dreamer may struggle to remember it. This makes dreams one of the most private forms of human experience. The same was true thousands of years ago. Persian kings dreamed. Farmers dreamed. Travelers dreamed. Priests dreamed. Children dreamed. Everyone carried a private world behind closed eyes. Some dreams became stories. Most disappeared. The night continues. The ancient homes remain quiet. The gardens breathe softly in the cool air. The mountains stand beyond the darkness. And inside sleeping minds, countless invisible stories unfold. No archaeological excavation will ever uncover them. No inscription can preserve their exact images. They existed for a moment and then vanished. Perhaps that is what makes them beautiful. They were temporary. Like fragrance. Like smoke. Like a sip of wine. Like the flicker of a flame. A moment appears. A moment passes. And only memory remains. The ancient Persian night slowly approaches morning. The stars begin to fade almost imperceptibly. The darkness will eventually become lighter. People will wake. Fires will be rekindled. Work will begin. Food will be prepared. The ordinary world will return. But for a few remaining moments, the ancient landscape belongs entirely to sleep. The mind wanders. The body rests. And somewhere between dream and waking, consciousness remains suspended in a quiet place. Not completely here. Not completely elsewhere. Simply floating between two worlds. And perhaps that peaceful threshold is one of the oldest altered states humanity has ever known. The night is still. The dream is fading. Morning is waiting. The social world of intoxication. Wine, celebration, and self-control. Morning slowly arrives over the ancient Persian landscape. The darkness becomes lighter. The stars disappear one by one. The gardens begin to emerge from shadow. Water catches the first pale light of dawn. And somewhere inside a quiet household, the remains of the previous evening are still visible. A few vessels. A little food. A fading fire. Perhaps an empty cup. The night of drinking has ended. But the social world surrounding wine continues. To understand what intoxication meant in ancient Persia, it is not enough to study the drink itself. We also need to understand the people, customs, expectations, and ideas surrounding it. Wine did not exist in isolation. It belonged to meals, to hospitality, to celebration, to diplomacy, to wealth, and sometimes to religious or ceremonial life. A drink could therefore mean different things depending on where, when, and why it was consumed. For someone living in a simple household, a fermented drink might be part of an ordinary meal. For an elite household, wine could become part of a larger display of abundance. At a royal gathering, the entire setting could communicate power. Food might arrive in large quantities. Fine vessels could be displayed. Guests could be arranged according to status. Servants could move through the space. Music or conversation could fill the air. And wine could flow as part of the celebration. Yet celebration did not necessarily mean complete loss of control. Ancient societies often had strong ideas about proper behavior. A person who drank too much might become embarrassing. A person who remained composed could be admired. The ability to enjoy pleasure without being controlled by it could itself be considered a form of strength. This tension between pleasure and self-control appears repeatedly throughout ancient cultures. Wine could loosen the tongue. It could encourage laughter. It could make people feel more comfortable. But it could also weaken judgment. That contradiction was probably obvious to anyone who had experienced intoxication. At first, drinking might feel pleasant. The body becomes warm. Conversation becomes easier. The evening feels relaxed. Then, if drinking continues, the experience changes. Speech may become less controlled. Movement becomes less precise. Emotions can become stronger. A person may say things they would normally keep private. They may take risks they would normally avoid. The same drink that created relaxation can eventually create disorder. Ancient people knew this without needing modern medical explanations. They had eyes. They had memories. They had mornings after celebrations. And they could observe what happened to people who drank too much. This is why moderation appears as an important theme in many ancient discussions of alcohol. The ideal was not necessarily to avoid pleasure. It was to remain master of oneself. Self-control was connected with dignity. This idea would have been especially important among elites. Royal courts depended upon hierarchy. People were expected to understand their positions. A banquet might look informal, but the social order remained present. Who sat where mattered. Who received attention mattered. Who served whom mattered. Who spoke mattered. Who drank might matter. A person who became heavily intoxicated could temporarily lose the dignity expected from their position. In this sense, drinking could reveal character. A person who remained calm might appear disciplined. A person who became reckless might reveal weakness. This is one reason ancient feasts were not simply places of pleasure. They were also social performances. People were being observed. Relationships were being strengthened. Alliances could be discussed. Generosity could be demonstrated. Status could be displayed. And wine could help create a relaxed environment in which conversation flowed more freely. The ancient Persian Empire was enormous. Its rulers governed territories containing many languages, cultures, religions, and traditions. Maintaining relationships across such a world required more than military force. Hospitality mattered. Gift-giving mattered. Ceremony mattered. Feasting mattered. A royal banquet could communicate that the ruler possessed enough resources to feed and entertain important guests. Abundance itself became a political message. Imagine entering such a gathering. The first impression would not necessarily be the wine. It might be the scale, the architecture, the clothing, the food, the vessels, the number of people, the sounds, the smells. Wine would simply become one element in a much larger sensory experience. As the evening continued, however, the drink could begin to change the atmosphere. Conversation might become more animated. Laughter might become easier. People could become more relaxed. The formal distance between individuals might soften. This social effect is one reason wine remained important in many ancient societies. It could help transform a gathering from a formal meeting into a shared experience. But the same process could go too far. A banquet could become disorderly. Arguments could begin. People could lose their balance. Someone might fall asleep. Someone might become sick. Someone might simply become unpleasant. Ancient people were not strangers to these consequences. The morning after excessive drinking was part of human experience long before modern times. And this is why the popular image of ancient Persians endlessly drinking is misleading. Most human beings, in any period, spend most of their lives doing ordinary things. Eating, working, sleeping, traveling, talking, caring for family, preparing food, repairing homes, growing crops, managing animals. Drinking heavily would have been only one possible activity, and certainly not the constant condition of everyday life. Even among wealthy people, feasts were special occasions. Ordinary meals were probably much less elaborate. Wine could accompany them, but abundance was not necessarily constant. Resources had to be produced. Grapes had to be cultivated. Wine had to be stored. Containers had to be made. Food had to be prepared. Servants had to work. Transport had to move goods. Behind every cup was a long chain of labor. This is another reason ancient wine should not be romanticized. The beautiful banquet existed because countless people worked to create it. Farmers cultivated vineyards. Workers harvested grapes. People transported vessels. Others prepared food. Servants maintained the household. The drink at the table represented an entire agricultural and economic system. When the cup was raised, the work of many people was already inside it. This was especially true in imperial centers. The Persian Empire had extensive systems for collecting and distributing resources. The royal court depended upon organized supplies. Food and drink could arrive from different regions. This allowed elite banquets to become extraordinary displays of imperial reach. The table could almost become a map of the empire. Different foods represented different landscapes. Different wines represented different regions. Different vessels represented different artistic traditions. And the people themselves could come from many parts of the empire. Yet beneath this diversity was a shared human activity. People eating together. People drinking together. People talking. People laughing. People becoming tired. People eventually going home or going to sleep. The basic experience was familiar. The social meaning was ancient. There is also something important about the pace of drinking. Without modern nightlife culture, artificial lighting, and constant entertainment, ancient evenings could unfold more slowly. Darkness naturally limited activity. A banquet could continue by firelight, but eventually fatigue would arrive. The body would demand rest. This created a natural boundary. The night could not continue forever. The lamps needed fuel. The fires needed tending. The guests needed sleep. Eventually, the gathering ended. The last cup was placed down. The final conversation became quieter. And the ancient Persian household returned to silence. This slow rhythm is useful to remember when imagining intoxication in the ancient world. The experience was not necessarily a sudden rush. It could be gradual. A drink. Another. Food. Conversation. Warmth. Relaxation. Fatigue. Sleep. For some people, perhaps more drinks followed. For others, the evening ended early. There was no single Persian experience. There were many. Different classes. Different regions. Different periods. Different personalities. Different levels of access to alcohol. Different reasons for drinking. History rarely gives us one simple answer. And perhaps that is the most honest way to imagine ancient Persian drinking culture. Not as a world where everyone was constantly intoxicated. Not as a world where nobody drank. But as a society in which wine existed within a complex network of food, hospitality, wealth, ceremony, and human behavior. The sun is now rising over the ancient landscape. The garden is visible again. The vessels from last night are quiet. The fire has become ash. The night has disappeared. And with morning comes ordinary life. The fields need attention. Animals need care. Water must be carried. Food must be prepared. The empire continues. The household continues. Life continues. The cup is empty. The celebration is over. And perhaps that is the quiet lesson of intoxication in ancient Persia. Pleasure was temporary. The altered state passed. The body returned to itself. And eventually, everyone had to wake. The ancient morning becomes brighter. When pleasure went too far, the morning has arrived over ancient Persia. The darkness has lifted from the gardens, and the first light rests upon the walls and pathways. The vessels from the previous evening are quiet now. The fire has become a bed of ash. The sounds of celebration have disappeared. And the body begins to remember what happened during the night. For some, there may have been nothing unpleasant. Perhaps the evening ended with quiet conversation, a little wine, and sleep. For others, drinking may have continued too far. This is the less romantic side of ancient intoxication. The same wine that could bring warmth and relaxation could eventually bring discomfort. The body has limits. Those limits existed thousands of years ago just as they do today. At first, alcohol can create a feeling of ease. The muscles may relax. Conversation can become more spontaneous. A person may laugh more easily. Small worries can seem distant. But as consumption increases, the effects become stronger. Judgment becomes less reliable. Balance becomes weaker. Speech can become unclear. Emotions may become exaggerated. The person who felt calm earlier may become confused or irritable. The experience can move from pleasure toward disorder. Ancient people would have observed this repeatedly. They did not need modern medical instruments. They could simply watch what happened after too much drinking. Someone might stumble. Someone might fall asleep unexpectedly. Someone might become sick. Someone might begin an argument. Someone might become unusually emotional. And eventually, the gathering would have to end. This is important because ancient drinking culture was not simply a story of pleasure. It was also a story of boundaries. How much was enough? When should a person stop? What behavior was acceptable? What happened when self-control disappeared? These questions were relevant in ancient societies just as they are now. Among elite communities, self-control could have particular importance. A person of high status was expected to behave with dignity. A feast could provide an opportunity to demonstrate generosity, confidence, and sophistication. But excessive intoxication could undermine those qualities. A person who became uncontrollable could become a source of embarrassment. This is one reason moderation could be admired. The ability to drink without losing control demonstrated discipline. The ability to enjoy pleasure without becoming its servant was a form of social strength. Ancient writers from neighboring cultures sometimes described Persian drinking practices. Greek authors, in particular, wrote about Persian luxury, feasting, and wine. But these accounts must be treated carefully. The Greeks had their own ideas about Persians. Persia was a powerful rival and, at times, an enemy. Descriptions of Persian luxury could therefore contain exaggeration or cultural stereotypes. When an ancient author describes another society as excessively wealthy or excessively indulgent, we should ask why the story was being told. Was it neutral observation? Moral criticism? Political propaganda? Entertainment? Or some mixture of all four? This does not mean the accounts are useless. They can provide clues, but they should be compared with archaeology and other evidence. The surviving material record gives us a more complicated picture. Wine was certainly known. Banquets certainly existed. Elite households possessed valuable vessels. But the idea that every Persian was constantly drinking to excess does not fit the reality of ordinary life. Most people had work to do. Farmers needed to tend fields. Workers needed to build and repair. Travelers needed to move. Families needed to prepare food. Animals needed care. Excessive intoxication would have made ordinary responsibilities difficult. So heavy drinking was likely connected more strongly with particular occasions and social settings than with everyday life for everyone. The distinction between elite celebration and ordinary life is important. A royal banquet could involve extraordinary quantities of food and drink. But that did not mean the same experience was available to every household. Wine required vineyards. Vineyards required land and labor. Fermentation required vessels. Storage required space. Transportation required organization. Good wine could therefore represent considerable resources. For ordinary people, fermented beverages may have been simpler, weaker, or less consistently available. The ancient world was unequal. Access to luxury was unequal. Access to intoxication could therefore also be unequal. This inequality is often hidden when we imagine ancient feasts. We see the palace. We imagine the wine. We forget the workers who produced it. Behind every banquet was agricultural labor. Someone cultivated grapes. Someone harvested them. Someone carried them. Someone processed them. Someone stored the finished drink. Someone cleaned the vessels. Someone prepared the food. The feast was the visible end of a much larger system. And when the feast ended, the work continued. The next morning, the household had to be restored. Vessels needed washing. Food needed preparation. Fires needed tending. Supplies needed replacing. The empire itself did not pause because someone had been drinking the previous night. This contrast between pleasure and responsibility is another important feature of ancient life. There was a time for celebration. There was also a time for work. The two had to coexist. This may explain why self-control mattered so much. A person could enjoy a feast and still be expected to return to ordinary responsibilities afterward. The body eventually demanded recovery. If too much alcohol had been consumed, the next morning could be unpleasant. Thirst, fatigue, headache, nausea, a heavy feeling in the body. The ancient world had no modern hangover medicine. People relied on rest, food, water, and time. Perhaps some traditional remedies were used. Perhaps certain foods or drinks were believed to help. But the basic solution was simple. Wait. Let the body recover. The morning would eventually pass. This physical reality makes ancient intoxication feel strangely familiar. Thousands of years may separate us from the Persian Empire. The palaces are ruins. The clothing is unfamiliar. The languages have changed. The political world has disappeared. Yet the body remains recognizable. Too much alcohol still produces consequences. Too little sleep still produces fatigue. A pleasant evening can still become an unpleasant morning. Human physiology creates a bridge between the ancient world and our own. But there is another side to intoxication. Sometimes people seek not simply pleasure but escape. They may drink because they are tired, because they are anxious, because they want to forget, because they want to belong, because everyone around them is drinking, because celebration creates social pressure. We cannot know how frequently these motivations existed in ancient Persia. The evidence is too limited. But human emotions are ancient. People experienced sadness, fear, loneliness, stress, loss, joy, love, celebration. Alcohol could interact with all of these emotions. That does not mean ancient people had modern ideas about drinking behavior. It simply means they were human. The emotional relationship with intoxicants may therefore have been complex. One person might drink because the occasion was joyful. Another might drink because they were exhausted. Another might avoid wine completely. Another might drink too much. There was never one universal experience. This is why the phrase, "what getting high was like in ancient Persia," needs a broad answer. There was no single Persian high. There were different substances, different preparations, different settings, different people, different purposes, and different effects. Wine could relax. Medicines could relieve pain. Ritual could focus attention. Fragrance could transform atmosphere. Dreams could create entire worlds. Hauma remains mysterious. And sometimes the altered state came simply from exhaustion or emotion. The ancient Persian experience of consciousness was therefore much wider than intoxication alone. As the day continues, the morning becomes brighter. The garden has returned to ordinary life. Birds move through the trees. Water continues to flow. The remains of the feast are being cleared. The extraordinary night has become an ordinary morning. And perhaps this is the most peaceful way to understand the temporary nature of intoxication. Whatever the substance, the experience passes. The warmth disappears. The altered perception fades. The body returns to normal. The mind becomes clear again. Life resumes. The ancient Persians would have known this rhythm intimately. Pleasure, excess, fatigue, recovery, then another day. The empire continues around them. Caravans travel. Fields are cultivated. Messages move between distant settlements. Palaces remain busy. Gardens grow. And somewhere, perhaps, another feast is being prepared. But for now, the cup remains empty. The fire is cold. The morning is calm. The ancient night has become memory. And beneath the brightening Persian sky, the world continues quietly. There is no need to rush toward another celebration. There is simply the slow return to ordinary life. The altered state has ended. The body has returned. The mind has settled. And the morning carries everything forward. The mystery of Hauma. The sacred drink. The ancient Persian night returns. The bright morning has passed, the heat of the day has softened, and once again the landscape settles into darkness. The mountains become silhouettes. The gardens grow quiet. Water moves gently through channels. And somewhere in the distance, a small fire continues to glow. Now we arrive at perhaps the most mysterious part of our journey. Hauma. Few ancient substances have created as much curiosity. It appears in the sacred literature of ancient Iran. It is connected with ritual. It is associated with vitality, protection, and sacred power. It was prepared as a drink. And yet, after thousands of years, we still cannot say with complete confidence which physical plant originally stood behind every ancient reference to Haumar. This uncertainty is part of its fascination. The word itself belongs to an ancient religious world. In the Avesta, the sacred texts of Zoroastrian tradition, Haumar is both a sacred plant and a divine or personified presence. The related Vedic tradition of ancient India contains the closely related concept of Soma. The similarities between Haumar and Soma have long attracted scholars. Both are associated with sacred ritual. Both involve a plant preparation. Both are connected with religious power. Both are described in ways that suggest importance far beyond ordinary food or drink. But the exact botanical identity remains debated. Many plants have been proposed over the years. Ephedra is one of the most frequently discussed candidates. Other possibilities have also been suggested. But there is no universally accepted answer that allows us to say, with certainty, this was the plant. That means we must resist one of the easiest mistakes in ancient history. We should not take the mystery and turn it into certainty. Haumar is mysterious. That is enough. We do not need to invent a definite psychedelic experience. We do not need to imagine ancient Persians lying beneath the stars after drinking a powerful hallucinogen. The surviving evidence does not justify such a simple story. Instead, we can look carefully at what the tradition tells us. Haumar was sacred. It was prepared. It was associated with ritual. It was consumed. It was connected with strength and vitality. And it occupied a special position within ancient Iranian religious thought. That alone makes it remarkable. The preparation itself would have been part of the experience. Plants were gathered. They were processed. Their juice was extracted. The preparation was connected with ritual actions and prayers. The act of making the drink was not simply a kitchen task. It belonged to sacred practice. This distinction matters. When people today hear the word drink, they often imagine something consumed casually. But sacred drinks can have entirely different meanings. They can symbolize life, renewal, strength, purity, connection with the divine, participation in tradition. Haumar belonged to this world. Its importance cannot be reduced to chemistry. Imagine the preparation taking place quietly. The plant material is handled carefully. The ritual follows established patterns. Words are spoken. The preparation is made. The sacred drink is produced. Everything is deliberate. Nothing is rushed. The purpose is not simply to consume something. The preparation itself is part of the sacred act. This is common in religious traditions. The meaning of a ritual often comes from repetition. The same action is performed again and again. The same words are spoken. The same materials are used. The repetition creates continuity. A person performing the ritual knows that others performed something similar before them. And perhaps others will continue after them. The individual becomes part of a chain stretching backward through generations. Haumar therefore existed within a world where tradition mattered enormously. The sacred drink was not merely a substance. It was heritage. It connected the present with the ancient past. This is one reason its identity could remain meaningful even as the physical details of preparation changed. Religious traditions evolve. Plants become unavailable. Geography changes. Languages change. Interpretations change. Yet a sacred concept can survive. The word remains. The ritual remains. The symbolism remains. And eventually, historians are left trying to reconstruct what the original experience might have been. The problem becomes especially difficult because the surviving descriptions are religious rather than scientific. They do not provide a modern chemical analysis. They do not list active compounds. They do not describe measurable neurological effects. Instead, Haumar is described through poetry, symbolism, ritual language, and religious imagery. It is associated with health and vitality. It can be connected with heroic strength. It belongs to a sacred order. This language tells us what Haumar meant. It tells us less clearly what it felt like. That distinction is essential. Meaning and sensation are not identical. A person can drink something because it is sacred without seeking intoxication. A person can experience a physical effect without understanding its chemical cause. And a ritual can be powerful even when the substance itself produces only modest physiological effects. This is why the question, "What did Haumar feel like?" may not have one answer. Different preparations could have produced different effects. Different individuals could have responded differently. And the ritual context could have shaped the interpretation. Imagine consuming a sacred preparation while surrounded by prayer, fire, traditional words, and a community that believes the substance carries spiritual significance. Even a mild physical sensation could become meaningful. Warmth might be interpreted as vitality. Calmness might be interpreted as sacred peace. Alertness might be interpreted as strength. A change in perception might be interpreted through religious language. The experience would belong to both body and belief. This is something modern discussions of ancient drugs often overlook. People do not consume substances in an empty psychological space. Expectations matter. Environment matters. Culture matters. Memory matters. And meaning matters. A substance cannot tell us what an experience meant. The person interprets it. The culture provides the vocabulary. The ritual provides the setting. And the body provides the physical sensations. All four can combine. The ancient Persian world was therefore not simply a chemical laboratory. It was a religious world. Haumar existed within a sacred cosmology. The drink was part of a larger understanding of life, purity, strength, and divine order. This makes it very different from modern recreational intoxication. Modern recreational drug use often focuses on the experience itself. How does it feel? How long does it last? How strong is it? Ancient ritual substances could have a different emphasis. Why is this substance sacred? Who is allowed to prepare it? When is it consumed? What words accompany it? What does it symbolize? What tradition does it preserve? These questions may have mattered more than the sensation itself. The physical effects were still real, of course. Any substance consumed by the human body can produce physical responses. But the cultural meaning could be even more important. And because the botanical identity is uncertain, we should be especially careful about describing a specific high. Some proposed plants could produce stimulation. Others may have different effects. Some possibilities may not explain every feature of the ancient descriptions. The uncertainty remains. But uncertainty does not make the story less fascinating. In some ways, it makes it more fascinating. A sacred plant disappeared into history. Its exact identity became uncertain. Its ritual memory survived. Its name survived. Its religious importance survived. And now, thousands of years later, we are still asking what it might have been. The ancient landscape remains quiet. The preparation has ended. The sacred drink has been consumed. The fire continues to burn. The night air is cool. And perhaps the most important thing to remember is that Haumar was not simply an ancient drug. It was part of a religious universe. It represented something. It belonged somewhere. It carried memory. It connected people with tradition. And perhaps, for those who consumed it, that meaning was inseparable from whatever physical sensation followed. The ancient Persian night becomes deeper. The stars appear brighter. The mountains remain silent. And the mystery of Halma remains exactly where history left it. Not completely solved. Not completely forgotten. A sacred drink at the edge of recorded memory. A plant whose identity is uncertain. A ritual whose echo survived. And a question that continues to drift quietly through the centuries. What did it really feel like? Perhaps we will never know. And perhaps that unanswered question is part of the ancient world's beauty.